Hello everyone, welcome to the What If Anime YouTube channel. Today, we are diving into an exciting new story that will take your imagination to the next level. Let's get started. What if Naruto unlocks 2 Dormant Bloodline and become overpowered? If you like, then please subscribe and do comment. Hit 100 plus likes if you want part 2. Let's get started. Streets of Konoha. Naruto was running as fast as his feet could carry him. Right behind him was a mob of people chasing after him, throwing rocks at him. The mob was attempting to land a solid hit on him and cause him injury so they could catch him. This occurrence unfortunately was not uncommon for young Naruto, and it happened every year on his birthday and every once in a while during the rest of the year. But Naruto could never understand, never knew why people always attacked and acted mean towards him. Naruto ducked into an alley to hopefully lose the crowd of people. Naruto ran down the alley and came to a dead end. Naruto turned around and waited, knowing what was to come next, as it had happened many times in the past. Already resigned to the beating that was about to come, Naruto stood stone still as the crowd came into the alley. An indifferent expression was on Naruto's face as the mob approached. The mob started yelling curses and threats at Naruto, then a person threw a bottle at Naruto and all hell broke loose. The mob moved forward and dragged Naruto to the center of the mob to start the beating him unmercifully. The beating was horrific as the civilians that blamed Naruto for their loved ones' deaths attacked without remorse. Besides the usual stabbing, burning and general punching and kicking that the mob usually did to Naruto, some of the people in the mob were creative in their torture and attempted killing of the demon. Some of the civilians were flaying sections of skin from Naruto's body. Another civilian decided that he wanted to prevent the demon child from ever having demon spawns and went to castrate Naruto. Naruto was awake for all of this, having been through things like this many times. He had an abnormal high pain tolerance. But as the civilian went to castrate Naruto, red chakra burst from Naruto in a shroud around his body, a chakra tail waving behind him. The civilians watched as the wounds on Naruto quickly healed, leaving no marks at all, while Naruto stood up to face his attackers. Eyes down with his hair covering his eyes, Naruto spoke to the mob. "You call this child a demon when you are far worse than any demon for attacking an innocent child." Naruto looked up, but instead of bright blue eyes that usually showing determination and happiness, there was silted black pupils with red eyes showing an endless depth of malice and hate. Naruto's feature had taken on a more feral look, and to those of the mob he was starting to resemble the demon fox that was inside of him. The mob took a step back in fear at Naruto's new appearance, just as a chakra claw came off the shroud and began to attack the people in the mob. The first swipe of the chakra claw killed several civilians that had previously tried to kill Naruto. The mob dispersed as fast as possible, but they couldn't escape fast enough to avoid death. The chakra around Naruto's continued to rage even after the Anbu and the Hokage arrived, but before they could move to subdue him, he fainted and the shroud disappeared. The ki coming off the Sandaime Hokage was enormous. The Anbu in the area started to sweat, feeling like death was about to descend upon them at any moment. In a voice that left no room for argument, the Hokage said, "I want the civilians that were a part of that mob interrogated and the leaders killed. If you find any ninja that were involved, I want them captured and brought to Ibiki and Anko. Also tell Anko that she has my blessing to have some fun." The Anbu shivered at the cruel tone in the Hokage's voice, but blurred away to complete the task assigned to them by their Hokage and to escape the ki that permeated the air. After the Anbu left the area in search of the people that were a part of the mob, the Hokage sadly and gingerly picked up Naruto to carry him to the hospital. To avoid possibly hurting the boy, the Hokage decided to run across the rooftops to get to the hospital. The Hokage couldn't see anything wrong with him, but that didn't mean there wasn't any internal damage or injuries. Naruto's mindscape. "Damn it, my head, it feels like someone stepped on it," said a confused Naruto. After taking a quick look around, Naruto said, "Those idiots put me in a sewer. This has to be a new low for those people. I mean, isn't enough to beat me, now they have to throw me down here too." Getting up, Naruto began to walk, trying to find a way out of the sewer tunnels. As Naruto walked in the tunnels, he noticed the pipes that lined the walls. After exploring the tunnels for a time, Naruto came to a large room with a giant cage making up one of the walls. Naruto walked towards the colossal iron bars of the cage to see what was inside. Naruto came to the edge of the cage and peered inside. The sight that Naruto saw inside the cage was interesting to say the least. He saw a gorgeous girl in her teens, with bright red hair and a prefect figure sitting against one of the walls crying into her knees mumbling something that Naruto couldn't make out. Not wanting the girl to continue to cry, Naruto walked into the cage and walked up to the girl and said in a caring voice, "Are you okay, miss?" Looking up at the sound of a voice, the girl's eyes widened. With a whisper she said, "Naruto, is that you?" Quirking an eye at the question, he said, "How do you know my name? I don't believe we have ever met." The girl instantly jumped up and started to hug the life out of Naruto. Naruto began to run out of air and in a desperate voice said, "Air, air, I need air." The girl let go immediately and looked down in shame at hurting Naruto. Naruto regained his breath and looked at the girl that had just hugged him and said, "So how is it that you know me?" The girl looked up from the ground and looked Naruto in the eyes before saying, "Well, you don't know me, but I have known you for a while now, 6 years to be precise." Naruto stared at her for a moment before saying, "You're the Kyuubi," in a matter-of-fact tone. Slowly nodding her head yes, the girl now known as the Kyuubi stood up and walked up to Naruto and gave him a more reasonable hug. Naruto just stood there shocked by the fact that he was in the presence of the strongest demon ever. Finishing the hug, Kyuubi stepped back and looked at Naruto and said, "Naruto, I want to say I am sorry for all the pain I have caused you for being sealed in you. I would understand if you hated me for all time." Snapping out of his stupor, Naruto looked at her for a second and said in a calm but decisive tone, "It is not your fault. The villagers attacked me due to their own misunderstanding of the ninja arts. If they think I am you, then they have never understood the concept of sealing. I am the container, not the contents, so I hold nothing against you." Kyuubi stared at the 6-year-old in front of her and was amazed at the maturity shown. "Thank you, Naruto," said Kyuubi. "Naruto, take a seat, I think we have something to talk about," said Kyuubi after a moment of silence. Doing as he was told, Naruto sat down and listened to Kyuubi. "First, I want to ask you a question. What is your dream, Naruto?" said a serious Kyuubi. After thinking for a moment, Naruto said, "To become the strongest ninja in the world, to protect the people that are important to me and to make my parents proud." Nodding, Kyuubi said, "A noble goal, Naruto, but you will have to work very hard to achieve that goal." Nodding his head, Naruto said, "Nothing worth having comes easily. This is true, Naruto, and I have a surprise to help you on your path to your dream. I am going to train you to be the strongest ninja in the world. By the time I am done training, you will be as stronger than anyone your age, and if you are serious about your dream, you will become a threat to Jonin level ninja. But now I want to tell you who your parents are," said Kyuubi. Naruto stared at Kyuubi with the wide-eyed of a young child and said, "You know who my parents are?" "Yes, Naruto, I know who they were. They were very strong ninja. Hell, your father beat me and sealed me in you," said Kyuubi. "Wait, didn't the Yondaime Hokage seal you inside of me?" "Yes, Naruto, the 4th Hokage did seal me inside of you," said Kyuubi. "So that means that Namikaze Minato is my father," said an overly excited Naruto. "Yes, he was your father and your mother was his wife Uzumaki Kushina. Both were amazing ninja that were easily cage level. Minato was a Fuinjutsu master and was famous for his Rasengan and Hiraishin techniques. Your mother Kushina was also a seal master and Kenjutsu master as well. Unfortunately, that is the limit of what I know," said Kyuubi. Nodding, Naruto says, "Thank you for telling me who my parents are." Nodding a thank you, Kyuubi began, "Now the surprise I promised. To put it simply, Naruto, you have 2 dojutsus. The Sharingan, the dojutsu of the Uchiha clan, and the Rinnegan, the dojutsu of the Sage of 6 Paths. Both are extremely powerful, and once trained they will give you a great boost in your ninja career. But because you have both of your genetics, they actually conflicted with each other, meaning you won't be able to activate them naturally. That is where I come in, because I am going to force them to activate with my Yuki. But I can't do it right now without causing the whole village to freak out and think I am trying to take control, so we will do it later when we are in a location that people can't detect my Yuki, okay?" Looking up at Kyuubi with a mixture of excitement and awe, Naruto nodded his head, slowly absorbing the information that was just told to him. Finally accepting the information, Naruto looked at Kyuubi and asked, "When will we begin training my dojutsus and ninja skills?" Smirking at the young child in front of her, Kyuubi said, "We will begin your training tomorrow, but for right now we need to talk about what you are going to do when you wake up. Right now the Hokage is sitting in your hospital room waiting for you to wake up. When you do, I want you to ask him to put you in the academy early so you can learn to protect yourself. This will be a cover because I want you to fail the final twice when you get to your 4th year in the academy so you seem to the populace of the Leaf Village as an idiot so they won't bother you. But in this time I will be training you to be an elite ninja. I will give you more details later, but right now you need to wake up. Nodding his head, Naruto said, "Okay, Q-chan, see you later." Naruto faded from his mindscape, leaving a blushing Kyuubi behind. Slowly opening his eye, Naruto took a look around. As he scanned the room, his eyes came upon the form of the Hokage sitting in a chair with his head in his hands. The stress of the day obvious in the way he was sitting. Naruto cleared his throat and the Hokage snapped his head up to look at the boy. Untold relief and sadness showed in the old Hokage's eyes as he looked at Naruto. Final speaking, the Hokage said, "How are you feeling, Naruto?" Giving the Hokage a genuine smile, he said, "I am feeling better now, thank you for asking." After a few moments of quiet, Naruto spoke up again. "Gigi, can you put me in the academy? I want to learn to protect myself so I don't end up in the hospital anymore." Nodding his head, the Hokage said, "That seems fine, Naruto. The academy has already started, but I can get you in a week's time." Thanking the Hokage, Naruto asked if he could leave the hospital. The Hokage handed Naruto a key and said that it was for an apartment. He also told him where to find the apartment complex. Then with a nod from the Hokage, Naruto got out of the bed and got dressed in his normal clothes. Naruto ran out of the hospital and ran to his new home to rest for tomorrow. Watching the boy leave, the Hokage sighed, happy that Naruto is fine. Walking out of the hospital, the Hokage shined to his office. Sitting down, his feature became hard. The Anbu in the room knew that the gentle Hokage that they all knew was gone replaced the god of shinobi. In a cold voice, the god of shinobi said, "I want all Anbu out of this office now." With that, all Anbu left in a flash. Sitting down, the Hokage took out a scroll and began to write a letter to one of his students. The message was for Jiraiya, the current spy master of the Konoha, and the letter was in order to return to the Konoha. Upon finishing the letter, Sarutobi summoned a messenger monkey. Giving the letter to the messenger summon, the monkey nodded and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Turning to look over the village, Sarutobi sighed and thought, "How did I let the village get this bad? The corruption and hatred is horrible." Giggling perversely, the Toad Saga scribbled notes into his notebook without taking his eyes off the women in front of him. "That's it, take off the towel." A puff of smoke appeared next to Jiraiya just as a small trickle of blood started to run from his nose. The monkey summon appeared from the smoke and waited for the man to acknowledge his presence while mentally snickering at the perverted old man. After a few minutes of nothing from the perverted man, the monkey decided to jump on his head. Jiraiya instantly snapped out of his trance once he felt an animal on his head. The animal jumped off and he recognized it as a monkey from his sensei. Taking the scroll and thanking the summon, Jiraiya started to read the letter. Finishing the letter, Jiraiya moved with a speed that few knew he could to the edge of the village he was currently at and began going through hand seals. Finishing, Jiraiya slammed his hand on the ground and a giant toad appeared. The boss of the Toad clan spoke to the person on his head saying, "What is it, Jiraiya? Why have you summoned me?" Jiraiya spoke, but the happy, carefree tone the Toad boss expected was not there, only seriousness and rage. "I need to get to the Leaf Village now, Gamabunta," said a fuming Jiraiya. Nodding his head, Gamabunta jumped off in the direction of the Konoha. Naruto woke up after his night in his mindscape, talking with Kyuubi about her plans for the next few days. Getting up and going about his morning routine, Naruto got ready for the day for training that Kyuubi promised. Finishing getting ready for the day, Naruto ran out his door and head to the only training ground no one ever used, Training Ground 44. Coming to a clearing deep inside the Forest of Death, Naruto sat in the center and started to meditate in lotus position as Kyuubi instructed last night. Naruto breathed deeply, relaxing his body. Kyuubi's voice entered his mind and she said, "Okay Naruto, I am going to start now, so be ready, this is going to hurt a lot." Naruto began to feel a burning in his gut as the Yuki spread through his system. His whole body burned with pain. Form his body changed to accept the genetic change. It was the worst pain that Naruto had ever felt, greater than any beating he had ever received from the civilians. Naruto yelled in agony as the process came to its peak, holding his eyes in an attempt to stop the pain radiating off of them. After an hour of constant pain, Naruto felt the energy begin to fade and the pain ease in his eyes. Once the pain had faded, Naruto winced at the sunlight. When he opened his eyes, everything seemed to be brighter than before. He walked over to a stream that cuts through the clearing and looked at his reflection. Staring back at him was his reflection, but instead of piercing blue eye that he was used to, purple eyes with a dot-like pupil, concentric rings and 9 tones surrounding the pupil, picture of the story. But then he looked at the rest of his reflection and he noticed he looked older. Kyuubi whistled and said, "Wow, that looks cool. It seems that the 2 dojutsus merged into a single version. It also looks like that forcing the dojutsus to awaken had the bonus of causing them to both mature to their final stage. It also appears that awakening the dojutsus have forced your body to mature more quickly to be able to support the Rinnegan and Sharingan. If I was to guess, you have aged 4 years in the last hour, meaning you are physically a 10-year-old. This is not bad, but we will have to watch to see if this causes problem later. But for now I will put up an unbreakable henge on you to cover up the fact that you suddenly got older and grew so much." Kyuubi put a henge on Naruto and then went back to talking to him. "Now we will move on to training other things and we will work on your training for your dojutsu later. But first, Naruto, I want you to learn a jutsu that will allow you to accelerate your training. It is called the Shadow Clone Jutsu and it is extremely useful. Your father used this technique quite a bit to become so strong. Now to perform this jutsu you have to make a cross with your fingers and channel chakra. Like this, Q-chan," said Naruto. "Yes, that is perfect. Now just picture yourself while you channel your chakra and then you will get a clone," said Kyuubi. With that, a puff of smoke and out popped a half-dead clone of Naruto. "Try again, kid, you won't get this one your first try," said an encouraging Kyuubi. Naruto gave a mental nod to Kyuubi and continued to practice. After 2 hours of practice, Naruto finally managed to create a perfect clone. Dispelling his clone, Naruto heard Kyuubi's voice enter his mind. "Great kid, that is perfect. Now I can tell you why this jutsu is so great. The shadow clone was originally used as a scouting technique because of the clone's ability to transfer information after it dispels. But if a person has high enough chakra reserves, then they can use it to train in things like technique, chakra control, muscle memory and knowledge, which means you can learn things faster than anyone ever could hope to learn. Your father was very liberal with this technique and could use it to train, although he was never able to create more than 10 and the clones could never last more than a day," said Kyuubi. Naruto widened his eyes and nodded dumbly at the amazing information that Kyuubi was telling him. "Now Naruto, I want you to work on creating and maintaining more clones. It will take you a while, but after a week you should have larger chakra reserves, so you will be able to create around 100 clones." Naruto nodded his head in understanding as he focused on creating more clones. After a day of work, Naruto could create 10 clones and have the clones hold for an hour before dispelling. Naruto repeated this every day, creating and sparring with his clones until he dispelled them. He would practice until he exhausted his chakra reserves and then he would slowly walk home to rest. A week went by this way, and during this time Naruto's chakra reserves expanded exponentially to serve to Naruto's excessive use of chakra. He also learned how to recover unused chakra from clones that dispel for any other reason other than chakra exhaustion. This proved to be really useful since he was able to practice longer. This was due to a few factors according to Kyuubi. One was the fact that he had naturally large reserves. The other fact that went into his rapid growth was his extremely high healing rate that was due to his Uzumaki heritage and was amplified by Kyuubi's Yuki. After a week of training, Naruto once again arrived at his training spot and heard Kyuubi say in his mind, "Alright, create 100 clones, but you will need to mix my Yuki with your chakra to create that many clones and not be tired. So do the hand seals and I will focus the Yuki," stated Kyuubi. Naruto did the hand seals and shouted out, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." A giant puff of smoke surrounded Naruto and 100 clones appeared. "Now Naruto, I want 25 of them to do the leaf floating exercise I showed you last night in your mind skate. Then have another 25 go to the library to start reading about taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu, fuinjutsu, kenjutsu and chakra control techniques. Have the other 50 stay here, I have other plans for them," said Kyuubi. Naruto caught his breath from the massive amount of effort it took to summon that many clones and adopting an authoritative tone. Naruto ordered a fourth of the clones to start practicing the leaf floating exercise. He then told another fourth of the clone to go to the library and start reading books on taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu, fuinjutsu, and kenjutsu and chakra control techniques, and to do it discreetly as to not draw suspicion. Once all the clones left to do what was ordered of them, Naruto heard Kyuubi talking again. Okay, no, I want you to do the shadow clone jutsu, but I will use only my Yuki to create the clone. Naruto made the cross hand sign while Kyuubi channeled her Yuki. A puff of smoke appeared next to Naruto. When the smoke cleared, Kyuubi was standing there with a grin. Naruto stared for a moment before asking, "How you are out of the seal?" said Naruto. "I'm not actually free of the seal, see," said Kyuubi, as she points to a collar around her neck with the kanji for seal on it. Naruto nodded in acceptance of the information and said, "Okay, so what are the last 50 clones for?" Kyuubi quickly made 2 more clones of her person and explained, "One group is going to be learning fuinjutsu from me, while another will be learning my personal taijutsu style, as well as a few others I think will fit you." Once again Naruto nodded in acceptance before asking, "Okay, then what training am I going to be doing?" "Excellent question, Naruto. You be working out to strengthen your body while you clones learn. Now for the next month I want you to run around the entire village 5 times. With each lap you complete, I want you to then stop and do 200 sit-ups and 100 push-ups," said Kyuubi. Naruto looked at Kyuubi while imitating a fish. Kyuubi looked at Naruto and said, "If you want to be strong, then you have to work hard. It is that simple. Now get going." Naruto turned around and started running. Once Naruto was far enough away, Kyuubi called out, "Anbu-san, you can come out now." The raven-masked Anbu appeared in the clearing across from Kyuubi and asked, "Who are you?" "I think you can figure it out, Uchiha," said Kyuubi as she changed into her Han-yu form, displaying her 9 tails. With a stoic face the Anbu responded, "You're the Kyuubi, aren't you?" Kyuubi smirked and said, "See, I knew you could guess it, but now I have to ask you not to tell the Hokage. Naruto needs to be trained and he needs to have someone in his life that cares for him. I am that person right now, and if you tell the Hokage, then he might have Jiraiya the Toad Sannin tighten the seal on me. I also want to clarify and say I am only a shadow clone, so I can't actually do anything to the village, and as you can see, pointing to the collar on her neck, I still have the seal on me, so I can't do anything to harm Naruto." The Anbu was silent for a moment before saying, "I will not tell the Hokage, as I want to see how this will play out before I potentially bring misfortune down on Naruto. But if you do anything to influence him, or if I see any sign of betrayal from you, then I will end this. Naruto will also have to come clean as well, seeing as Naruto will definitely be much stronger than his classmates when he enters the academy." Nodding to Kyuubi said, "I know he will have to tell the Hokage eventually, but I don't want anyone interfering with his training right now, as he is still too weak to actually defend himself. But I am guessing the old monkey sent you to guard Naruto. By the way, what is your name?" Taking off his mask, the Anbu began to speak. "My name is Itachi, and as you said before, I am from the Uchiha clan." "Well, nice to meet you," Kyuubi said politely before Itachi disappeared once again into the shadows of the forest. Time skip. Week later. Naruto was running through the forest of death looking for his training spot so he can start working on a jutsu Kyuubi wanted him to learn. It was called the Blood Clone, and Kyuubi said that it would help with keeping his training secret until Naruto was ready to reveal his true power. Entering the clearing that Naruto was looking for, he thought of Kyuubi's plan to hide his true abilities for the civilians. Flashback. "Okay Naruto, tomorrow I am going to have you create a new kind of clone. It will be stronger than the shadow clone and will have the same ability to transfer anything it learns to you, but the difference is it will not dispel until it is wounded lethally. This clone is called a blood clone, and we will be using it so I can train you during the day while the clone does what you normally would do, or what we would want to make the civilian think you would usually do. The clone will also create your reputation as a troublemaker and a prankster. The clone will have half your strength and will generate its own chakra, but about 1/10 as quickly as you would," explained Kyuubi as Naruto listened intently. Kyuubi continued with her plan. "Once we make the clone, it will pull pranks on the citizens on the Leaf Village that are mean to you. Then in 2 years, when you can enter the academy, the clone will go in your place and pass the academy for you, so you can still learn everything that the academy has offer while you learn how to be an effective ninja from me," explained Kyuubi. Flashback end. Naruto smirked at the thought of surprising everyone when he finally takes the graduation exam and blows everyone else out of the water. Clearing his head, Naruto began running through hand seals. Coming to a finish, Naruto bit his thumb and gathered half of his chakra. Slamming his hand on the ground, blood flowed from the bite mark and formed a red version of him. As the blood clone solidified, it changed colors to match its creator. The process finally complete, the clone saluted Naruto and ran off to start its mission of creating an alternate persona. With blood clone Naruto was having a fun time. Since leaving the boss, he had started to create the reputation of the village idiot and loudmouth. He also started to gather information on potential prank targets around the village. After that, Naruto went home to start to draw up a battle plan for future pranks that he would pull. Hokage office. Sarutobi was having an interesting day, to say the least. After contacting his student Jiraiya and having him return to the village, he asked Jiraiya to create a spy network within the Leaf Village so that he could better control the village. He also ordered the removal and replacement of the matrons at the orphanage in which Naruto used to live. But the most important thing that came out of Naruto's attack was what Sarutobi assigned Jiraiya to do. Flashback. Sarutobi was sitting in his office attacking the bane of all cages, paperwork. As he started on a new document, something landed on his windowsill. Not even turning his head, Sarutobi said a pleasant tone, "Jiraiya, how good to see you." Jiraiya said in a serious tone, "Why is Naruto being attacked? I thought you were protecting him." Jiraiya, you have to understand that I have tried to keep him safe, but the people don't see a little boy but a demon in human flesh. If we are to help Naruto, I mean to truly help him, we need to create a village that won't hinder him as much as the leaf currently does, said a calm Sarutobi. Speaking again, Jiraiya said, "How can I help, sensei? I need you to expand your spy network to include the Leaf Village, and more specifically, I need you to look into the Civilian Council. I am tired of the barricades and roadblocks they put up when I try to help the village. I want to know everything in the village that affects the village's operation. I need to know who is clean and who needs to be dealt with. This is a dictatorship. It is about time I remind the Civilian Council of this fact," said a serious Sarutobi. Nodding, Jiraiya said, "Consider it done. It is about time you took control of the village, and I would love to be the one responsible for putting some of the civilians behind bars." "Alright then, you are dismissed," said Sarutobi. Jiraiya shined away, leaving the Hokage alone once again. Flashback end. Jiraiya entered the Hokage office, snapping the Hokage out of his thoughts. "Report," said a serious Hokage. "It is worse than we thought. It seems that the Civilian Council has been selling village secrets to Iwa and the other nations for large sums of money. Everything from defense plans to the number of ninja we currently have," said a fuming Jiraiya. Taking the folder from Jiraiya, Sarutobi looked over the contents, finally speaking. "It appears they have also been taking money from the village coffers and the Namikaze account," said a furious Hokage. Speaking loudly, the Hokage said, "Anbu, assemble the council. It is time we deal with the corruption in the Leaf Village." With that command, the Anbu in the room shined away to complete their leader's orders. The Hokage and Jiraiya laughed evilly at the thought of the council meeting that was to take place. An hour later, the Hokage walked at the council room and sat down. Every council member looked at the man with interest, wondering what he could want. The Hokage looked around before smiling and saying, "I called you all here to discuss the information I have received from Jiraiya. As it turns out, many members of the Civilian Council have been selling information to Konoha's enemies." The Civilian Council went into an uproar imminently at the accusation, before the Hokage saturated the air with chakra and killer intent. The Hokage then continued by saying in a stone-cold tone, "I have recently had a wake-up call and have realized that I have let my responsibilities slip in my old age, but I intend to correct that." At the end of his short speech, Anbu appeared behind members of the Civilian Council and slit the throats of the members that had committed acts of treason against Konoha. The Anbu then cleared the room of the dead before the Hokage looked to the Ninja Council and said, "I imagine that there are no objections to my actions." The heads of the various ninja clans in Konoha remained quiet, although there were a few members that were extremely glad to be rid of the Civilian Council. Having not received a response, the Hokage started to speak once again. "While I am glad that my judgment is not being questioned here, but I have a message for the council as a whole. This village is a dictatorship, not a democracy. The council has no power in deciding anything concerning the whole village. It is meant to be a way for the Hokage to stay in touch with the people he serves, thus the council only has the privilege of suggesting policy, and if you step out of line again, I will gladly remind you why I am in charge. The remaining people still alive in the civilian council nodded their heads furiously, while the clan heads each gave a curt nod of understanding, even though they understood this principle already and knew where the Hokage's powers ends and there began. Training Ground 44. It had a month since Naruto had met Kyuubi and began his training. During this time, Naruto's life had improved greatly. The civilians stopped harassing him and trying to beat him. They had also started to give him fair prices when he went to get supplies and food. While Naruto didn't understand the sudden change, he was not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Naruto was also very happy with his progress in the ninja arts. Kyuubi's training program consisted of Naruto spending the first half of his day working out his body with various exercises meant to target every muscle in his body to get him ready for the harsh life of a ninja. He then either sparred with Kyuubi or Itachi for the rest of the day, or he would practice his taijutsu stances and katas. The training didn't end there though. At night, Kyuubi would teach him history, math, science, chakra theory, fuinjutsu formulas and strategy to make Naruto a well-rounded person and ninja. To be completely honest, with training non-stop, Naruto was completely burned out, but he realized he couldn't stop if he wanted to be the best. He was currently learning the basics of 3 taijutsu styles. The first style he was learning was the Leaping Fox style. It was a style relying heavily on feints and speed to hit the enemy and disable them. The second style is called the Spinning Lotus. It is a highly defensive style that has the person sitting in a lotus position to start. The last style is called the Power Fist style, is a very offensive style that relies on precise, powerful hits to specific joints, pressure points and muscles to render those areas useless and cause mass damage to the body of the opponent. Each of these styles alone were deadly and extremely powerful once mastered. But even at the first tier of the styles, Naruto was already a taijutsu maverick, being able to beat anyone his own age with ease. With time, Naruto hoped he could combine the styles together to create a taijutsu form that would utterly destroy anyone that tried to beat it. Naruto's training in ninjutsu was progressing incredibly. Naruto mastered the 3 academy jutsus in the second week of training. Although the academy's clone jutsu was too low in chakra level for Naruto to do properly, he had also discovered that his henge was actually a lot stronger. He could actually transform into anything he wanted and it would be solid instead of an illusion. This, according to Kyuubi, could be very helpful in espionage missions and had a lot of potential in combat situations. Naruto had also started to ramp up his chakra control training, moving on to the tree walking exercise. Combining the tree walking exercise with the shadow clone jutsu increased Naruto's chakra control, which had the benefits of refined his control over his massive chakra reserves and increased his reserves at the same time. Kyuubi also began Naruto on his elemental chakra training. Kyuubi had Naruto get chakra paper from a local store and had him test his affinities. While his Sharingan gave him an affinity for all the major elements, he had a natural affinity to wind and fire. After that, Kyuubi had him start learning to control his wind nature by having him try to cut a leaf in half using only chakra. Naruto and Kyuubi also found out through trial and error that Naruto had no ability or talent in casting a genjutsu without the use of his dojutsu. But his massive reserves allowed him to dispel almost any genjutsu. Kyuubi was trying to teach Naruto how to detect genjutsus. Itachi proved very helpful in this field, putting Naruto in various genjutsus while they sparred to see if Naruto could break them while fighting. Itachi also taught him some genjutsus that he could cast with his Sharingan portion of his dojutsu. The field in which Naruto was doing the best was fuinjutsu. Kyuubi had Naruto read books on the subject before she even let him start to work on writing them. While Naruto usually hated to read, he actually found anything related to Funjutsu too extremely interesting, and gave Kyuubi no issues whenever she made him read more on the subject. Kyuubi suspected it was his Uzumaki blood showing though, but after that Kyuubi had him read up in the subject. She started to show him the lowest level seals she knew and how to write them. This consisted mostly of storage seals and explosion seals. Naruto worked with a group of clones to learn the formulas that had to be written perfectly in order for them to work. Naruto also picked up some more low-level seals from the books he read and started to practice them as he mastered others. Naruto had mastered so many lower-level seals that Kyuubi started him on some of the more difficult material and had him work on combining the simpler seals together to create different results. Naruto was even selling the lower-level seals he mastered to a local weapons shop that allowed him to be there. Naruto sold his seals under a henge alias which he named Arashi Uzumaki and was making a small fortune due to the popularity of the seals and the lack of competition. Surprisingly, there was a lack of quality seal masters in the village. Naruto also became friends with the owner's daughter, Tenten. She was a year older than him, but they got along really well despite the age difference. Naruto was also started to train with chakra weights, an item Naruto found while looking around at the weapons shop. The weights basically worked by adding chakra to the bands around each limb, which increased the weight of the bands until the person stops adding chakra. It was an incredible training technique, but the weights were extremely expensive. If it wasn't for his seal sales, he would have not been able to afford them. Of course, in a few years Naruto should be able to make a pair for himself due to his rapid growth in the field of seals. Time skip. 1 year. Naruto was walking towards his apartment after a harsh day of training. It was late and Naruto was enjoying the quiet of the night when Naruto began hearing shouting from the Hyuga compound. Naruto looked toward the sound of the noise and saw a man dressed in all black running towards him. In the man's arm was a tied-up Hyuga girl. Acting instantly, Naruto pulled out a kunai and threw it at the kidnapper. The man easily blocked it and spoke up, "You will have to better than that to stop me, kid." Naruto looked at him and said in an emotionless voice, "No, I don't. All I had to do was distract you." With that, Itachi appeared behind the man and gave him a swift chop to the neck, knocking him unconscious. Naruto walked up to the man and applied a chakra restriction tag to the man's back while Itachi tied him up. Naruto then went over to the scared girl and began to untie her. Once she was free, she grabbed onto Naruto and started crying. Not soon after that, the Hyuga Hiashi arrived and took his daughter back to the compound, but before they left, the girl walked up to Naruto and asked, "What is your name?" Naruto said, "Naruto Uzumaki, nice to meet you." The girl giggled and blushed a deep crimson before she said, "My name is Hinata and I am very grateful that you saved me from that evil man." As Hinata was talking with Naruto, Hiashi turned to watch the exchange between the blonde and his daughter and smiled. Hisashi then walked up and stood next to his brother and said, "Impressive for a boy so young to stand up to an elite-level ninja." Hiashi turned to his identical brother and said, "Yes, it is, and this is why I won't prevent Hinata from befriending the boy even if we both know what he contains. He might just be the person Hinata needs to push her to be better and to gain her confidence." At this point, Hinata had finished thanking Naruto and Itachi and went back to stand by her father. Hiashi then spoke up and addressed Naruto and Itachi. "I would like to thank you on behalf of the Hyuga clan, and if there is anything you ever need, please don't hesitate to ask." With that, Hisashi held his hand out to his daughter and Hinata grasped it before they turned around and walked back towards the Hyuga compound. Naruto smiled as he turns to deal with the man Itachi was currently picking up off the ground. Time skip. 1 year. Blood clone Naruto entered the classroom and looked around. He was early and decided to sit in the back so no one would bother him. Putting his head down, he waited for his classmates to arrive. About 30 minutes later, people began to trickle in and sit down. Naruto observed his class looking for anyone with potential as a friend, but found many already tainted by their parents by the looks he was receiving. Naruto also noticed a lack of malice coming from the kids from the ninja families. The bell rang and the teacher walked in and began roll call. She went down the list coming to Naruto's name, where she paused and looked at him with pure hatred and disgust. Naruto sighed and thought, "This is going to be a long 4 years." At the end of the roll call, Naruto looked around the room at the classmates he would have for the next 4 years and mused, "Wow, there are a lot of clan heads in this class. I wonder why." Time skip. 6 months. Naruto was lying on his couch reading a scroll on fire manipulation late at night when a knock came from his front door. Having practices with his sensing abilities he had received from Kyuubi, Naruto detected Itachi's chakra signature. Naruto stood up and walked over to the door. Opening the door, Naruto said with a smile, "Hello Itachi, why are you here so late at night?" Itachi nodded his hello and walked inside before saying, "I am here to say goodbye and give you a couple of important scrolls before I leave on my long-term mission." Naruto jumped up and down at the thought of what kind of scrolls Itachi could be giving him. While Naruto was jumping, Itachi took out 2 scrolls from his scroll pockets of his Jonin jacket and handed them to Naruto. One scroll will tell you everything that I currently know about the Sharingan and where you can learn more information. The other scroll contains the personal jutsu library of the Uchiha clan. I believe you to be responsible enough to handle these gifts and hope you use them to protect and better the village, said an even stoic Itachi. Naruto marveled at the 2 scrolls in his hand and looked up at Itachi before saying in a stunned voice, "Thank you." Itachi looked at Naruto and said, "You're welcome, Naruto. I hope you use them to become a great and honorable ninja." Now with that done, I must say my goodbye, Naruto. I am about to undertake a mission that will keep me away from the village for a very long time. Naruto smiled at Itachi and said, "Alright then, good luck and I hope you succeed in your mission. It was fun having you as my other sensei." Itachi gave a nod before shining away. Itachi looked out over his clan's home and took a deep breath before activating his Mangekyo Sharingan and drawing his short sword. Looking down from his perch on an electric utility pole, Itachi spotted his younger brother and appeared in a flash before him. Sasuke looked his older brother in the eye and noticed his Sharingan was different. That was the last conscious thought Sasuke had before Itachi put him to sleep with his Mangekyo. In a quiet whisper, Itachi said to no one in particular, "I am sorry." Itachi then turned to face the Uchiha guards that had moved on his position and said, "Today the scourge that is the Uchiha clan ends." Rushing at a level none of the guard had ever seen him move before, Itachi slit all of their throats before appearing behind the group of ninja. After that, Itachi went into a trance, killing all the people that stood against him in the village. After he had hunted down all the traitors of the leaf, Itachi ran to the limits of the village to escape the Anbu that had been sent to capture him. From a distance, Danzo looked upon the Uchiha district, watching Itachi kill his family and friends without mercy. Once Itachi began to leave, Danzo looked to an Anbu to his right and said, "Kill the rest and collect the Sharingan eyes. Sarutobi may be in control for now, but my day is coming and I will need all the power I can get." The rude Anbu nodded and said in a monotone voice, "Yes, Lord Danzo." Meanwhile, Sarutobi looked on with sadness at his seeing orb to watch as one of his most loyal ninja flees the scene of his latest mission. Sarutobi did not want Itachi to be the one to kill his family. Itachi had volunteered as he thought it was the best way to stop the Uchiha clan from being disgraced as well as save the village from civil war. The Hokage had sent the Anbu as soon as he saw that Itachi had finished his assignment. After the Anbu left, Sarutobi turned to look out over the village. The Anbu arrived to see Root Ninja killing the rest of the Uchiha clan and engaged them to prevent from wiping the clan out. The Root Anbu disappeared at the arrival of the village Anbu, leaving a bloody battlefield in their wake. Men, women and children, ninja and civilian alike, were dead on the ground, dead. The Anbu proceeded to secure the area and dispatched a team to follow Itachi and another to follow the Root Anbu. The Anbu that were left to clean up the mess proceeded to check the bodies for any sign of life before making a pile of the dead in the center of the district. A bear-masked Anbu came over the form of Sasuke Uchiha and checked for a plus. Having already checked many bodies before this, the Anbu was surprised to feel a pulse. Instantly the Anbu called out, "I got a live one. It seems he is unconscious in some sort of genjutsu." Another Anbu came over and said, "Bear, why don't you bring him to the hospital for treatment? We don't want the kid to wake up and see his entire family dead." The Anbu known as Bear picked the prone form of Sasuke up and jumped across the rooftops to the hospital. Gecko, the other Anbu, turned back to the others and asked, "Have all the bodies been checked and collected?" Bird saluted her captain and said, "Yes, sir, but it seems that the Root Anbu managed to take 5 sets of Sharingan eyes." Gecko nodded and said, "Alright, I will report this to the Hokage, finish up here and return to the base." Gecko shined away, leaving the remaining Anbu to burn the body of dead bodies. Time skip. 1 month. Naruto was currently walking through the Uchiha district and shivered at the quietness of the once loud and busy home of the Uchiha clan. Naruto kept walking through the district on his way to the Naka Shrine. No one was in the district at the moment, with Sasuke Uchiha currently at the academy and no one willing to come to this part of the village anymore after the massacre of the Uchiha clan. Naruto had the place to himself. Naruto pulled out one of the scrolls Itachi had given him and examined it once again. The scroll contained the basic explanation of the first 3 stages of the Sharingan and what each stage gave him in terms of abilities. It even gave training methods to improve these abilities. But the last paragraph of the scroll told him that if he wanted to know more he had to go to the Naka Shrine and find the secret room. So Naruto had come to see what could possibly be hidden in the Naka Shrine. Naruto arrived at the shrine and walked inside the sacred Uchiha building. He then proceeded to search the place to find the secret room talked about in the scroll Itachi had given him. After a half hour of searching, Naruto found a trapdoor under one of the mats on the floor. Naruto opened the door and descended into the dark. Naruto used fire manipulation to make a small flame appear in his hand. What Naruto then saw surprised him greatly. The room was a shrine of some sort with a tablet on the altar. Naruto walked over to the tablet and picked it up to see what it said. But to Naruto all it showed was random lines and it made no sense. After examining it for a while and trying to discern why Itachi had sent him to find this, Naruto had an idea. What if it could only be read by an Uchiha or a person with their bloodline limit? Naruto then activated his Sharingan and looked at it again, and this time Naruto could read it clearly. In fact, he could read the whole thing. Naruto then decided that he had stayed in this creepy place long enough. Naruto pulled out a storage scroll and stored the tablet in the scroll so he could read the whole thing later and see what he could learn from it. Time skip. 3 years. Naruto was currently sitting in the middle of a clearing meditating when Naruto decided to visit Kyuubi in his mindscape. Naruto entered his mind and came to the familiar tunnels that make up his subconscious. Naruto began walking through his mind and eventually came to the end of the tunnel, and it opened up to a green field that led into a forest. It had been some time ago, but Naruto had managed to master his mindscape and could alter the scenes in it. Kyuubi had helped him do this for 2 reasons. One, Kyuubi didn't have to live in a sewer anymore, and if the Yamanaka ever tried to invade Naruto's mind, Naruto would be able to defend his mind from their prowling. Naruto crossed the field and walked into the forest to where Naruto had created house for Kyuubi. As Naruto walked through the forest he saw the wildlife he had created to fill the forest. Naruto came to a clearing in the forest and saw the house that Kyuubi was using. He walked up to the front door and walked inside without knocking. Once inside, Naruto heard a faint moaning coming from Kyuubi's bedroom. Curiosity got the better of Naruto and he went to investigate. Naruto walked towards Kyuubi's room quietly and opened the door to Kyuubi's room very slowly as to not make any noise. The sight that Naruto saw before him caused his face to turn a deep shade of red. The sight before Naruto was a completely naked Kyuubi lying on her bed with her legs spread while Kyuubi massaged one of her breasts in one hand and she fingered herself with the other hand. Naruto was in shock and frozen with a combination of fear from what Kyuubi would do when she notices him and interest of seeing a girl naked for the first time. All of a sudden Kyuubi climaxed and she screamed out, "Ow Naruto, don't stop." Naruto instantly fainted from embarrassment and sexual overload. When Naruto's head hit the floor, Kyuubi instantly had her head up looking for the source of the noise. Her eyes landed on the crumpled form of Naruto and her face turned a light shade of red at being caught by her container masturbating. Kyuubi grabbed a robe and put it on before she picked up Naruto and put him on her bed until he came to. Kyuubi lay down next to her container and most recently love interest and stroked his hair as he slept. Naruto was out for an hour before he finally came to. Naruto's eyes fluttered open and his eyes landed on Kyuubi's face and he instantly started to blush again as the memories came back to him. When Kyuubi saw his eyes open, Kyuubi said in a sweet voice, "Hey there, sleepyhead." Naruto sat up at this and turned to her and said in an apologetic voice, "I am so sorry." Kyuubi put a finger to his lips and stopped him from talking and she started to talk. "Naruto, you have nothing to be sorry for. I should have locked the door or something. Plus I should have noticed when you entered your mindscape. But that is not really the point of the matter at the moment, as I think it is time you learn about woman." Time skip. 5 months. Naruto woke up and began getting ready for the day. He made a quick breakfast of eggs with ham bits cooked into it. As he was eating, Kyuubi woke up and began to chat with Naruto in his head. "Are you ready for today, Naruto?" Naruto thought back, "You're the one who trained me for this day, so I believe I am beyond ready to become a ninja." Both laughed at that, seeing as Naruto had changed a lot over the 6 years Kyuubi trained him. The once scrawny child was now replaced by a well-toned, quick-witted ninja. while he still retained his prankster attitude and hyper-personality that came with a kid his age, 12. But the most notable change would be today when he starts acting like himself instead of a stupid loser. One of the extreme changes that happened over the 6 years of training was the age in which Naruto appeared. Thanks to the Sharingan, his physical age has increased rapidly and he appeared to be 18. He wasn't complaining since one of the benefits of this was he was many times stronger than any of his classmates and he could hench to look his actual age, so it wasn't a problem. Walking to his closet, Naruto picked out of his wardrobe a black Anbu pants with orange and red flames on the bottom cuff of each leg. He also pulled out a black ninja jacket with Uzumaki crest on the back. The kanji for fox was also written above the Uzumaki crest. Naruto smirked as he looked at the new clothes, thinking of the shock to the people in his class at his new look. Laughing at the thought of his old attire, Naruto couldn't help but smile at the patrols of Anbu he had avoided in that monstrosity as training in stealth. Kyuubi thought that if Naruto could be stealthy in the Kill Me orange jumpsuit, then it would be 10 times easier in colors that actually blended. Naruto shook his head at the weird training and continued to get ready, attaching a kunai pouch and shuriken holster. Finishing getting dressed, he walked out of his apartment. Think of what today meant. As he walked, he realized it was graduation exam day, and today is the day he finally shows some of his abilities and stopped acting like an idiot, especially to a one Hyuga Hinata who he knew had a crush on him. His clone only acted dense so he could keep up his act as the class idiot. Of course, he suspected that his friends Shikamaru, Choji and Shino already knew that he was hiding something. If not all of them, then Shikamaru definitely, even if he never said anything about it. It amazed him sometimes how lazy Shikamaru could be. Naruto remembered the first time he met Shikamaru. Naruto met them when they entered the academy 4 years ago. Flashback. Naruto was sitting alone on the swing in the schoolyard eating his lunch when a person walked over and asked if he could sit with him. Naruto agreed instantly. This person turned out to be the Choji. Not soon after, 2 more people walked up to the small group and start talking to Choji. A kid with a pineapple hairdo started speaking. "Hey Choji," who is the guy with the blonde hair. Choji shook his head and said, "I don't know Shikamaru, but he was kind enough to let me sit here." Naruto instantly spoke up and said, "My name is Naruto, it is nice to meet you." The kid now known as Shikamaru spoke again saying, "My name is Shikamaru and the guy next to me is Shino and you have already met Choji. So do you think we can sit here to eat? The rest of the yard is already divided up." Naruto nodded in confirmation and the 2 boys sat down. Shikamaru lay down and began to watch clouds. From that day on they became friends, playing and hanging out together. Flashback end. Naruto smiled at the memory as he entered the academy yard. Leaf Academy. Walking into the classroom, Naruto saw many of his classmates talking amongst themselves, excitement for the exam being the major topic of conversation. As he walked further into the room, people began to notice his new attire. Kiba, the loud mouth of the class, stood up and pointed at Naruto saying, "Hey Dobi, what is with the new clothes? Are you trying to impress the teacher or something?" Naruto ignored Kiba, walking to an empty chair next to Hinata. Naruto spoke up and said, "Is it okay if I sit here?" Hinata nodded with a massive blush covering her face, not trusting her voice at the moment. Sitting down next to Hinata, Naruto noticed Sasuke glaring at him. Kiba, having been ignored, stepped in front of Naruto and said, "I asked you a question, loser, and I expect an answer." Naruto looked at Kiba and released some ki before saying, "You should learn your place, Mud. Don't demand something unless you are ready to back up what you are saying." Kiba was furious at being talked down to by the class clown. Kiba sent a punch at Naruto only to see that Naruto had moved. Naruto appeared behind Kiba and sent a quick chop to his neck, rendering him unconscious. Kiba's body crumpled to the floor as Naruto turned to his friends to talking to Shikamaru as Choji ate his chips and Shino, well, Shino doesn't talk that much. At this moment, the banshee of the class, Sakura, decided to make herself known. "Hey Naruto, stop trying to look cooler than Sasuke." Naruto covered his ears and said, "Stop screaming, you loud-mouthed banshee, you are hurting my ears." Sakura yelled back, "I do not talk that loud, you loser." With a resounding chorus, the whole class said in unison, "Yes you do." Sakura went back to fawning over her crush as Naruto went back to talking with Shikamaru, and Shino occasionally would put in his 2 cents when the topic was something that he found interesting. Iruka and Mizuki eventually walked in and quieted the class. Uruka told one of the civilian-raised students to wake Kiba. After Kiba was roused from his sleep, Uruka went into a long speech about the future and what becoming a ninja was all about. Mizuki then passed out the written exam and started the time. Naruto flipped over his test and noticed that he had a test meant for Chunin. Naruto examined the test and found a genjutsu on it. Quickly dispelled the genjutsu with a discreet kai. Naruto began to fill out the test. As Naruto wrote down answers, he noticed that Mizuki had not taken his eye off of him. Naruto began to wonder what Mizuki was up to. After the written exam, Mizuki and Uruka brought everyone outside to test their throwing ability. Kiba was up first and scored a 7 out of 10. As Kiba walked by Naruto, he said, "Beat that loser." Shino went next and Naruto, Choji and even Shikamaru cheered him on. Shino scored an 8 out of 10. After a few unimportant people when Ino was up, she scored a 6 out of 10, which didn't surprise Naruto due to her lack of training and fangirl attitude. Hinata was next and as she passed Naruto he whispered, "Good luck." Hinata blushed slightly and said a quick, "Thank you." Hinata got an impressive 9 out of 10. After Hinata was Choji and then Shikamaru both got a 7 out of 10. After they went, Sasuke stepped up to the line next and got a 9 out of 10. Sakura got a 6 out of 10, which again is not surprising. The rest of the class failed that portion of the exam with a 5 out of 10 or worse. The last person to go was Naruto. Taking the Tenkanai Naruto from Uruka, Naruto channeled some wind chakra into the weapons. Naruto then threw them all at once. The weapons blurred and hit a tree behind the dummy target. Kiba seeing this laughed and said, "You missed completely, you loser." Naruto then looked at Kiba and said, "Why don't you go and take a closer look, Kiba, and you will see that I didn't miss." Uruka, Mizuki and Kiba walked closer and saw that there were 10 holes in the dummy, each in an instant kill spot. Kiba turned away from the target and said, "Lucky throw." Mizuki looked at Naruto with pure rage but could do nothing but give him a perfect score. While Uruka was impressed by Naruto's accuracy, fortunately no one actually noticed that he used wind nature chakra. The group then moved to the sparring fields for the taijutsu evaluation. Once everyone was gathered around the taijutsu fields when Uruka announced, "For the taijutsu portion we will be holding a boys and a girls tournament. This will allow you to showcase your strategy as well as your ability to fight hand to hand. The boy and girl winner of their respective tournaments will each receiving extra points on their exam." After Uruka finished, the students separated with the girls on one side and the boys on the other. Mizuki then paired of the boys and the girls side and started the matches for the first round of the tournament. The two groups head to different fields and the first matches of the tournaments began. The first round of spars went well with Hinata, Sakura and Ino winning their matches in the girls' tournament, although Naruto was rather surprised that Sakura managed to win her match seeing as she came from a civilian family and never actually trained. In the boys' tournament, Choji, Shino, Kiba, Shikamaru, Sasuke won their matches. When it was Naruto's turn for the first round, Naruto was paired with some random civilian. Once the match began, Naruto dropped into a perfect academy stance and his opponent charged him thinking that he was still the dead last of the class. Unfortunately for that student, he never saw the attack that knocked him out coming as Naruto punched the kid right in the jaw, knocking him out instantly. The next round of the tournament was a bit more interesting for Naruto as he watched the matchups on the girls' side. The matchups were Ino against some civilian girl that managed to make it past the first round and Hinata going against Sakura. Ino's spar was rather boring as Ino had the obvious advantage since she was raised by a ninja clan. But the Hinata versus Sakura fight turned out to rather funny. Sakura walked on the field with a smug smile and said to Hinata, "You might as well give up now as I will win this match to prove to Sasuke that I am the best." Hinata just looked at Sakura with a blank expression and said, "I really don't care for your love for that emo brat. I think you are actually quite pathetic to be chasing after him so much." It was at this point that Sakura was fuming and said, "Well, who do you think is worth my time? The dead last. I mean, that is who you like, isn't it?" Hinata shaded her eyes with her hair and in a voice of controlled rage said, "Don't insult Naruto-kun." Uruka started the match and Hinata dropped into a gentle fist stance and charged Sakura. Sakura never stood a chance as she was using a sloppy academy stance and was nowhere near Hinata's level due to her lack of training and Hinata's constant training from her father since she turned 8. In the span of 10 seconds, Hinata had closed every major chakra point on Sakura's body. After that, Hinata straightened up and walked off the field while Ruka simply called the match and asked two civilian boys to carry Sakura to the infirmary. The boys' matches were definitely a decent show, as it was Choji going against Kiba, Shikamaru going against Shino, and Naruto going against Sasuke. Choji and Kiba put on a good show, but Kiba came out on top due to his clan's focus on taijutsu and Choji unable to use any of the jutsus that collaborate with his taijutsu. The next match was Shikamaru and Shino. It was a very slow match, but anyone that knew anything about the two fighting would have been impressed with the level of strategy involved. But in the end, Shikamaru forfeited because he thought it was too much of a bother to get around Shino's bugs. It was then Naruto's match, and Naruto was looking forward to this as he got to put the Uchiha brat in his place. Walking into the ring, Naruto fell into a perfect academy stance while Sasuke dropped into his family style, the interceptor. Mizuki started the match and Sasuke charged Naruto. Naruto sidestepped his punch and then grabbed it, flipping Sasuke and throwing him into the ground. The air was pushed from Sasuke's lungs from the force of the impact. Naruto stood over Sasuke and said, "Not so tough now, are you?" Sasuke rolled to the side and stood up again, attacking the blonde. Naruto weaved and blocked every single attack Sasuke sent his way. Sasuke jumped back to catch his breath. Naruto then said in a voice that even the teachers didn't hear, "My turn, Teme." Naruto instantly blurred out of sight to everyone but the instructors. Naruto mercilessly destroyed the great Uchiha, causing many of Sasuke's fangirls to yell at Naruto to stop. Once Sasuke fell unconscious, Naruto stopped attacking and began to walk away. Mizuki called the match, awarding Naruto the win and once again a perfect score. Sasuke was carried away by his fangirls as they fawned over him, all the while glaring at Naruto. Sakura, who had just returned from the nurse's office, saw Naruto beat down the last loyal Uchiha and tried to punch Naruto for hurting her precious Sasuke-kun, but failed when Naruto caught the punch easily. Naruto looked at Sakura and said, "Sakura, you are pathetic. Try training instead of fawning over your crush." The final round of the respective tournaments was rather fun for Naruto as he got to see Ino get her butt kicked by Hinata. But Naruto had the most fun in the final match of the boys' tournaments. Since there was 3 finalists in the boys' tournament, Ruka decided a 3-way match would be appropriate. So Naruto, Shino and Kiba faced off on the sparring field as they waited for Ruka to begin the match. Ruka started the match and Naruto was instantly attacked by Shino and Kiba. Naruto smiled as he blocked both attacks and pushed them back. Naruto called out and said, "I guess I am the guy that has a target on his back after my match with the Uchiha brat." All Naruto received was the calm faces of indifference from the 2 other combatants. Once again, the 2 double-teamed Naruto again and tried to get inside his guard. But Naruto blocked both of them before he shifted into his leaping fox style and began to turn the tide of battle. Kiba and Shino were suddenly on the defensive as Naruto slammed them with hard-hitting strikes. To Kiba and Shino, it felt like stone was hitting them instead of fists. At this point, Kiba and Shino were beginning to sweat as they felt their arms become numb due to Naruto's hard-hitting strikes. Shino jumped back to get some distance and said, "I forfeit. Naruto is much stronger and skilled than me, and I feel that he could have ended this a while ago if he felt like it." Unfortunately for Kiba, his pride would not let him to forfeit, so he continued to fight alone. But Naruto decided that he had messed with Kiba enough and used his greater level of speed to get behind Kiba and deliver a fierce chop to the neck, knocking Kiba out. Ruka then called the match and declared Naruto the winner. Ruka then dismissed the class for a 2-hour recess so that he could correct the tests from earlier. As the students dispersed to eat lunch and relax, Naruto walked up to Hinata and said, "Nice job winning the girls' tournament, and I like the confident side of you in your match against Sakura. Well, anyway, just wanted to congratulate you and wish you luck before I go and take care of some things." Hinata at this point had a full face blush and said in a soft voice, "Thank you, Naruto. You were great too." Naruto gave her a big smile and said, "Thanks, Hinata," before he turned around and left the school grounds. Once off the grounds, Naruto blurred through the village heading for the Hokage mansion. Sarutobi was having a great day. Not only was he finished with his paperwork for the day, but he was happy with the progress of the village, since he had retaken control of his village. With the information that Jiraiya had gathered, Sarutobi had been able to get rid of many of the annoying members of the civilian council. With the ninja council on his side, Sarutobi was able to reform much of the village. He had even fired his advisors, realizing they were causing some issues, and that they were to set in the old ways to innovate and be effective advisors. But believing that they were still loyal to the village and wanting what was best for it, he assigned them to the restructuring of the academy curriculum. This change has allowed a stricter weed-out process and is producing higher quality ninja. To fill the advisor position, he had Jiraiya take the position, which made sense due to Jiraiya's vast knowledge of the elemental nations. Sarutobi had even started an upgrade to the village walls to increase the detection radius of the barrier that surrounded the Leaf Village, as well increase the number of ninja working for the barrier core. All in all, he was happy with the progress, but he still had work to do. Just then Naruto barged into his office and said, "Hey Gigi, how's life treating you?" The old Hokage chuckled at the blonde's antics and said, "I am well, Naruto, but why are you here?" "I am here actually to discuss a possible security breach. Mizuki has been eyeing me lately and he smells of snakes," said a serious Naruto. At this the Hokage became serious and said, "Naruto, what do you think Mizuki is planning?" "I believe he is trying to get me to fail. For what reason I don't know, but I am here to ask you permission to fail on purpose to see what he is up to. The ninjutsu portion is next and I can fail the clone to see if what Mizuki will do," said Naruto. "That is fine, now I just need you perform the 3 academy jutsus and I will clear you to do it," said the Hokage. Naruto then did the 3 academy jutsus, Henge, Kawarimi and a clone, but Naruto did the shadow clone. The Hokage nodded in approval and handed Naruto a leaf headband. "This will be a C-rank mission. You are to investigate what Mizuki is doing and stop him," said a serious Hokage. Saluting the Hokage, Naruto walked out of the office back to the academy. Naruto arrived back at the academy and saw everyone heading in for the final part of the exam. Walking into the academy, Naruto saw a line of people waiting outside the classroom waiting for their turn. Naruto waited until it was his turn to enter the room. Once inside, Iruka directed him to perform the academy jutsus. Naruto started with the henge. After hanging into a perfect copy of Iruka, he then switched places with Mizuki. Dispelling the techniques, Naruto then tried to perform a clone. Purposely overloading the technique, Naruto produced a half-dead clone with no color. Iruka then spoke up and said, "I am sorry Naruto, you fail again." Mizuki then said, "He did create a clone, so why don't we pass him?" Iruka turned to Mizuki saying, "The rules are clear, he needs to do it correctly to pass." With that, Naruto left the room and went to wait on the swing in the schoolyard. Not long after, Mizuki came out of the academy and walked up to Naruto. "Hey Naruto, I know how you can still pass. You need to perform the extra credit exam," said a cheerful Mizuki. Feigning happiness, Naruto asked, "What do I have to do to complete the extra credit exam?" Mizuki smirked and said, "All you have to do is take a special scroll from the Hokage's office and deliver it to me at this location without being caught." Pointing to a location on a map, Mizuki then tells Naruto what the scroll looks like and where in the office he can find it. Time skip. Night. Naruto ran along the rooftops of the Konoha heading for the Hokage mansion, coming to a stop a few buildings away. Naruto watched the patrols guarding the mansion, looking for an opening where he could sneak past them into the Hokage's office. After an hour of sitting patiently, Naruto noticed a 30-second gap in the patrol rounds. Naruto sprinted to the Hokage office window. Reaching the window in a matter of seconds, Naruto slowly opened the window and slipped inside. Waiting for him in the office was none other than the Hokage. Wordlessly handing Naruto the forbidden scroll, the Hokage then said, "You will need to knock me out to make this look convincing." Naruto smiled deviously and said, "Fine old man, but you are going to enjoy this." Naruto went through a series of hand seals and said, "Transform." Naruto was then engulfed a cloud of smoke. As the smoke was clearing, the Hokage catch a glimpse of a hot young woman that was naked. The Hokage rocketed back and hit his head on the wall behind him, which knocked him out. Naruto laughed and jumped out the window, once again avoiding the Anbu patrols. Naruto ran to the spot Mizuki told him about but arrived 2 hours early. Naruto sat down and opened up the forbidden scroll. Naruto quickly started reading, and after an hour Naruto decides to copy the scroll so he could learn the techniques inside later. Pulling out a blank scroll, Naruto laid the forbidden scroll next to the blank one. Naruto was about to start writing when Kyuubi spoke up in his mind. Kid, instead of writing it, use this jutsu. A mental images of hand signs and the name of the jutsu went through his mind. Naruto then went through the series of hand seals that he had seen and slammed a hand on each scroll and whispered, "Information transfer jutsu." Writing appeared on the blank scroll, creating a perfect copy of the forbidden scroll. Naruto rolled both scrolls up and sealed his copy of the scroll into a storage seal inside his jacket. Naruto then gave a mental thanks to Kyuubi, but he was a little annoyed because that technique would have been helpful several times in the past. Not long after Naruto was done with that, Iruka appeared in front on Naruto. Naruto looked up at Iruka and decided to play it off as what Mizuki told him to do. Naruto said, "Iruka-sensei, I did it. I learned a jutsu from the scroll and passed the extra credit exam." Iruka looked at Naruto like he had grown a second head and said, "Naruto, there is no extra credit exam." "Who told you that there was?" Naruto responded cheerfully, "Mizuki-sensei told me about it." Iruka heard clapping coming from behind him and he turned around to see Mizuki. Mizuki decided to speak and said, "I am impressed you got the scroll, demon. I mean, you are the dead last in the class, even if you did extremely well on most of the final test." Looking towards Iruka, he continued to speak while he unlatched a Fuma shuriken from his back. "It is a shame that you had to get involved in this, Iruka, because now I have to kill both of you." Finishing his speech, Mizuki hurled the shuriken at Naruto. Iruka moved to protect Naruto, but at the same time and with a speed neither of the older ninja thought that an academy student could move. Naruto managed to catch the shuriken by the ring in the center and redirected it back at Mizuki. It was only due to his years of training that Mizuki was able to dodge the large shuriken as it flashed by him and embedded itself in a tree behind him. Iruka looked at Naruto amazed and said, "How did you do that? It should be well above your training and rank to do that." Naruto looked back at Iruka and said, "There are a lot of things you don't know about me, Iruka." Looking back to Mizuki, Naruto spoke in a commanding voice, "Mizuki, you are under arrest for treason against Konoha and are sentenced to death." Mizuki looked at Naruto amused and said, "Like an academy student could take me." Naruto smirked and said, "You shouldn't underestimate your opponents, especially one that is a Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi no Yoko." Both Mizuki and Iruka stared at him in shock while a single thought ran through both of their heads. How does he know about that? Mizuki decided to voice his thought and said, "How do you know about that, brat? It is against the law to tell you about it." Naruto looked at Mizuki and said, "Easy, I meet the demon you are oh so afraid of, and it explained to me what happened." Mizuki stared blankly before a thought ran through his mind. Shit, that was meant to unbalance him so it would be easier to kill him. Naruto made a hand sign while Mizuki was distracted, shouted multi-shadow clone jutsu. Thousands of clones appeared in the clearing and once again Mizuki and Iruka shared a similar thought, "Holy crap." Naruto stepped forward and said, "Let's have some fun." All the clones jumped forward and proceeded to beat Mizuki within an inch of his life. Once Mizuki was completely incapacitated, Naruto walked up to Mizuki's form and lifted him up so he was looking directly into his eyes. Naruto then activated his dojutsu and said, "I hope you rot in jail for your crimes." Naruto then proceeded to rip Mizuki's soul from his body and absorbed all the information Mizuki had gathered in his life. Naruto then tossed the soul behind him, where the ghostly figure of the Shinigami was waiting for his prize. Naruto then turned to a scared Iruka. Naruto smiled sheepishly and said, "So how is it that you keep finding me? I mean, I can avoid Anbu, yet you find me like it is nothing." Getting a hold of himself after seeing it was the same old Naruto, Iruka decided to answer his question and said, "I invented a jutsu that lets me use my chakra as sonar. Once you are good with the jutsu, you can find people easily." Naruto looked at Iruka and asked, "Could you please teach me the technique?" Iruka laughed and said, "You were always a fan of jutsu and technically you are not my problem to find anymore, so I guess you can learn it. So here, take this scroll, it explains the jutsu and tells you how to do it. I was planning on giving it to you as a gift when graduated." Naruto nodded his head in thanks and said, "Well, I better get back to Gigi with the forbidden scroll or I am dead." Iruka laughed and said, "You should get going and report what happened to the Hokage." Naruto nodded and shined out of the clearing. which once again shocked Iruka due to the high level of chakra needed to perform the technique. Hokage office. The Hokage sat in his office looking into his crystal ball until he saw Naruto leave the clearing and appear in his office. Looking up he said, "Hello my boy, I see thing went well, but I have to ask, how you managed to beat a Chunin-ranked ninja?" Naruto sighed and said, "This will involve a lot of highly classified information, so you should clear the room." The Hokage simply snapped his fingers and Naruto felt the Anbu leave and a privacy seal go into place. Naruto spoke once again and said, "You might want to get comfortable, this is going to take a while." Time skip. 2 hours. So let me get this straight, you have trained for the last 6 years under the most powerful and feared demon in the world at the moment. But said demon is friends with you and a girl. And you have an extremely powerful dojutsu that makes the Sharingan look like child's play partially because it is a combination of the Sharingan and the Rinnegan. But to put the cherry on top of it all, you managed to keep it secret this whole time, with the only exceptions being Itachi, your ex-sensei, Iruka and me, said the Hokage as he rubbed his temples. Naruto nodded his head and said, "That the gist of it?" The Hokage looked seriously at Naruto and said, "Exactly how powerful are you, Naruto?" Naruto shrugged and said, "Don't know, I have never tested my strength to its limits, so I can't honestly tell you. But I am not a Jonin yet in strength, since Itachi could beat me with ease. But I have control over most of the abilities granted to me from my dojutsu." The Hokage nodded and said, "Alright Naruto, let's move on the next topic of conversation, because you see as it is now, your graduating class has 28 students that are being made genin. So I have decided to make you a one-man team and your sensei will be Anko Mitarashi. I am doing this for a few reasons. One reason being you are leagues ahead of anyone in your class with your recent fight just pushing the point home. The other reason is you have learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu, which makes you a one-man wrecking crew. The purpose of your team will be an assassination team and back up for any of the other Genin teams, as well as take on missions that are out of most Genin ability but Chunin are too high to handle. That said, I want you to be at team placement tomorrow to meet you sensei." Naruto responded, "Okay Gigi, I will be there tomorrow." The Hokage smiled and said, "Then you are dismissed." As Naruto turned to leave the room, a kid burst in through the door and proceeded to say, "I am here to take that hat from you, old man." Sarutobi sighed, put a hand on his face and said, "Konohamaru, what are you doing?" Konohamaru lunged forward in an attempt to attack the Hokage and he stepped on his scarf, causing him to trip. Konohamaru fell to the floor and got up quickly saying, "Who did that?" He looked at Naruto, who had been watching this incident with amusement, and said, "Did you trip me? You did it, didn't you?" Naruto laughed at the kid in front of him and said, "I didn't have to do anything, you tripped on your own scarf. Besides, if you want to take the hat from the old man, then you will have to work very hard." Konohamaru became angry and said, "Liar, I know it was you who tripped me." Naruto hit Konohamaru on the side of the head and said, "Shut up brat and listen, you tripped on your own scarf, and even if you didn't, you wouldn't stand a chance against the Hokage. He has more experience and skill than you can ever dream. If you want to one day take that from him, you better train and become the best ninja in the village." With that, Naruto finished and walked out right as Ebisu walked in and started to apologize to the Hokage for the interruption. Konohamaru could only stand there with a blank face as he thought about what the ninja he had just met had said to him. Time skip. Next day. Naruto woke up from great dream and proceeded to get ready for the team placement that would take place today. After getting ready for the day, Naruto pulled out Iruka's technique and began to read it as he headed to the academy. As he read the scroll, his mind began to wonder what people would make up the teams. Hokage office. The Sandaime Hokage sat in front of the Jonin instructors waiting for the last person to arrive. Cough. Kakashi. Cough. Kakashi shined into the room and received a cold glare from the rest of the ninja present. The Hokage then began the meeting by saying, "Hello everyone, today you will be receiving your Genin teams. As many of you have read the Genin candidate file, I am taking suggestions for team placement." Instantly Asuma stepped forward and said, "I would like to be the instructor of Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akamichi. Their abilities work together perfectly and they have a great potential." The Hokage nodded and said, "That is what I was thinking, so that team formation is granted." Kakashi stepped forward next and said, "I request Sasuke Uchiha, Naruto Uzumaki and Sakura Haruno." The Hokage instantly said, "Denied. I have other plans for Naruto, so you may have Sasuke and Sakura, but the third member will be a boy that goes by the name of Sai. Kakashi stood there speechless. He could not believe that he didn't get to train his sensei's son, but then a thought occurred to him and he spoke to the Hokage once again. Sir, who will be Naruto's sensei? The Hokage looked back to Kakashi and said Anko will be Naruto's Jonin instructor. I have decided to make Naruto a one-man genin team due to his ability and the fact that he was Rookie of the Year. Everyone looked at the Hokage like he was insane. Then Kurenai Yuhi decided to voice the group's thoughts. Hokage-sama, according to Naruto's file, he is the dead last of his class. The Hokage began to snicker and said, here, this is Naruto's updated file, why don't you look it over and tell me that I am wrong in making him into a one-man team? As the Hokage handed a file to Kurenai. Kurenai took the file and glanced over the file. After 2 minutes, Kurenai looked at the Hokage and said, this can't be right. This says that he scored a perfect score on the academy exam and he even is able to use the shadow clone jutsu. Everyone in the room looked shocked at what Kurenai just announced with a few exceptions. Anko decided to finally make her presence known. This Gaki sounds interesting and I thought I was going to get stuck with 3 snot-nosed brats. The Hokage turned to Anko and said, Anko, I am putting Naruto under you because I believe you can continue his training. I am also making your team an assassination and backup team for when mission go wrong. The hard-hitting team, if you will. Naruto is too strong to put with the Sasuke Uchiha because it would lead to Susaki looking for any means to beat Naruto, which will make his loyalty questionable. Thus he would make a very good cleaner for when missions become too difficult for the genin originally assigned the task. Anko smiled at the team's purpose and said, I can't wait to meet this kid and test him myself. If half of what you say is true, then he will be interesting to say the least. The Hokage smiled at Anko and said, I advise you to take Naruto very seriously. While we do have a guess of how powerful he is, we are certain how strong he is, and he has a cunning mind that allows him to create strategies on the fly that would outsmart most Nara in a fight. The only thing he lacks is battle experience. Anko's smile only increased and said, I can't wait to meet this brat. The Hokage then turned to continue on with team placement and said, Kurenai, I am assigning Shino Aburame, Hinata Hyuga and Kiba Inuzuka to you as a tracking team. The Hokage continued placing teams with instructor and when he finally finished said, we'll go collect your teams and test them to see if they are worthy of becoming genin. The jonin in the room left in a flash to go collect their teams. While meeting was taking place, Naruto entered his classroom and walked to an empty seat next to Hinata. Sitting down, he turned to the blue-haired girl and said, I know this may be kind of sudden, but you like to go on a date sometime? Instantly Hinata went red in the face due to a massive blush and fainted on the spot. Falling forward, Naruto caught her before she could hit her head and leaned Hinata's head against his chest so she would be comfortable. While this was going on, a couple of people realized that Naruto in the room. Sasuke decided to find out why. Hey Dobi, why are you here? Didn't you fail the genin exam? Naruto glared back at the Uchiha and said, in case you're blind duck ass, I am wearing a Konoha headband, which means I passed. Sasuke then noticed the headband and turned around to brood. Sakura then decided to defend her crush by attempting to hit Naruto while saying, don't talk to Susake that way, Naruto baka. Naruto easily caught the punch and focused some ki at the pink banshee and said, I suggest you stop yelling first of all because you are rather annoying, and second, don't try to hit me because next time I won't just catch it. After Sakura went back to her seat, Hinata woke up. Naruto looked down at the girl and said in a sweet calm voice, have a nice nap, Hinata-chan. Hinata instantly bolted upright and looked at Naruto once again with a blush that could make a tomato jealous. Naruto asked his question again, seeing as Hinata looked confused, and said, so do you want to go out sometime? Hinata nodded her head, not trusting her words. Great, how about tomorrow at 7 I will pick you and we will go to dinner, sound good, said an enthusiastic Naruto. Hinata said in a quiet voice, that is perfect, Naruto too, I will see you then. Naruto smiled and said, okay then, it's a date. Naruto turned to the front of the room just as Iruka walked in the classroom. Everyone quieted down, eager to hear what teams they will be on. Iruka began with a boring speech about being a ninja and stuff like that before he began reading off the teams and their senseis. Naruto tuned out most of what Iruka said until he heard, Team 11, Naruto Uzumaki and your sensei will be Anko Mitarashi. Iruka finished and said, good luck in your ninja careers and I am proud to call you all my students. Iruka walked out of the classroom and everyone waited for the Jonin to arrive. Suddenly the classroom door was kicked in and a woman with spiky purple hair walked in and said in a loud commanding voice, which one of you is Naruto Uzumaki? The whole class pointed the Naruto and the woman spoke again, alright, you are with me, now follow me and we will start. Naruto followed the woman he assumed to be Anko to the Forest of Death where Anko stopped and sat down in a clearing inside the forest. Sitting down as well Anko began and said, my name is Anko Mitarashi and I am a special Jonin of Konoha. I like dango, performing tea ceremonies, my friends Kurenai and Yugo Azuki in training. I dislike ignorant villagers, rapists and my old sensei. My dream is to kill my old sensei and to become the #1 IT person in the village. Okay, now it is your turn. Naruto began saying, my name is Naruto Uzumaki and I am a genin of Konoha. I like ramen, my precious people in training. I dislike hateful villagers and perverts. My dream is to become the strongest ninja in the elemental nations to protect those important to me. Anko smiled and held out her hand and said, nice to meet you Naruto. Naruto took her hand and shook it firmly before they dropped their hands. Anko looked at Naruto with an evil smirk and said, okay, now that is out of the way, now we will begin your test. From what I have heard it should be interesting. To test your abilities we are going to have an all-out spar. The winner is the first person to give up or put the other person in a position where they could have been killed. Everything is legal in the fight except actually killing each other. I have already decided that you have what it takes to be a ninja, so this is just a test for me to see what you got. Naruto nodded and stood up. Once he was on his feet he made a hand sign that Anko didn't recognize and felt Naruto release a plus of chakra. Anko got up too and raised an eyebrow and asked, what did you just do Gaki? Naruto smiled and said, simple, I just released my training seal so I can go all out in this fight. Anko nodded and both of them got in a fighting stance. Once they were both ready Anko said, come at me with the intent to kill, ready, set, go. Naruto moved forward in a flash of pure speed that a newly minted genin shouldn't have been able to do and engaged a surprised Anko in a taijutsu battle. Anko dodged and blocked with practiced ease, but she could feel the power behind Naruto's strikes and knew that with some extra training he would be a powerhouse. Naruto on the same note was smiling, knowing he could finally push his limits. Not holding anything back, Naruto put his full force behind his strikes and used his instincts to help him block Anko's strikes. They jumped away from each other to get some space and to regroup when Naruto called out and said, well, I guess I should get serious now. Anko looked at him like he was crazy and saw his eyes change color from blue to purple. Before she could comment, Naruto was attacking again, but this time he was much faster and managed to get a few hits in before Anko's surprise wore off. They broke apart again and Anko huffed and said, wow, you are really fast for a fresh out of the academy genin. Naruto smirked and said, I am just getting warmed up, but I think it is time we kick it up a notch. Naruto made a cross hand sign and called out, Shadow Clone Jutsu. After the smoke cleared, 6 Narutos stood in front of Anko and they moved to surround her. Anko was in the middle of a circle of 6 clones when the real Naruto called out another jutsu as the others went through a long string of hand signs. The real Naruto called out, Gravity Style, Gravity Chains. Suddenly Anko felt a huge weight on her body and it was extremely difficult to move. Not soon after, the 5 clones finished their hand seals and called out their respective jutsus: Fire, Water, Wind, Earth, Lightning Style, Dragon Missile. 5 elemental dragons flew at Anko as she stared wide-eyed at the combination attack that was moving towards her. With an immense effort, Anko made a single hand sign and switched places with a log outside the clearing. The 5 jutsus clashed, causing a huge explosion and made a crater in the center of the clearing. Anko reappeared in the clearing and asked, how the hell did you do that? You just used every type of elemental chakra and those jutsus are high-ranking. I mean, it is a very impressive combination, but you will have to do better to beat me. Naruto smiled at her and said simply, okay. Going through more hand seals, Naruto slammed his hand on the ground and called out, summoning jutsu. 5 puffs of smoke appeared around Naruto. Once the smoke cleared, 5 foxes stood around Naruto, each wearing battle armor and wielding a weapon of some kind. The foxes were on their hind legs and walked closer to Naruto. The leader looked at Naruto and said, "How may we serve you, Naruto-sama?" Naruto spoke in a commanding voice as Anko stared in shock at the sight before her. "I am in a spar with my sensei. Don't kill her, just cause some damage." The 5 warrior foxes nodded and moved forward to engage Anko. Anko snapped out of her stupor just in time to avoid the first attacks of Naruto's warrior summons. Making a tactical retreat, Anko began going through hand seals and summoned a giant snake that dwarfed the 5 foxes that were attacking. The foxes went back to Naruto's side at the sight of the snake, and Naruto called up to Anko, calling out the big guns. "Well, two can play that game." Running through the necessary hand seals, Naruto gathered a huge amount of his chakra and summoned the boss of the fox contract. Anko stared up at the summoned animal in front of her and flinched in fear. Standing before her was a blood-red fox with 9 tails. Guess who? Kyuubi looked up at Naruto and said, "Was it really necessary to summon me? I mean, it seems a little bit of overkill." Naruto looked at Anko's terrified face and said, "No, this is totally worth it as a prank, and it makes sure that Anko knows who she is dealing with." Meanwhile, every Jonin and a majority of the Chunin stopped as they felt the evil chakra that they were all too familiar with. Instantly, the ninja that knew what the chakra was headed to the Hokage mansion for orders. Sarutobi felt the chakra too and started to sweat, knowing the destruction it could cause. He pulled out his seeing orb and found Naruto on top of the Kyuubi in it. He took in the sight and noticed the spike collar around the Kyuubi's neck. Sarutobi calmed down slight before he realized that he would have to explain this to the ninja that were undoubtedly on their way to him now. Back with Naruto. "Hey Naruto, I can feel the old man looking at us now with that all-seeing orb of his. We need to wrap this up because I sense a lot of activity from the ninja in the village," stated a neutral Kyuubi. Naruto swore, saying, "Crap, I forgot that your Yuki would be sensed 10 miles away." The old man must have felt it too and decided to check that you were not trying to break out, or worse, succeeded in breaking the seal. Quickly, Naruto called down to Anko and said, "Surrender or face the might of the Kyuubi no Kitsune." Anko called back in a slightly quivering tone, "I surrender." Naruto dismissed Kyuubi and his other summons and landed on the ground, followed by Anko. Naruto smiled at Anko and said, "Well, that was fun." Anko stared at him for a second with a blank expression before asking in a completely calm voice, "You can summon the Kyuubi to do your bidding?" Naruto responded in a happy voice, "Well, yes and no. Yes, I can summon her to the battlefield to be a scare factor, but if she uses any of her power while summoned, the seal will cause me and her extreme pain." Anko raised an eyebrow and said, "Wait a minute, did you say she?" Naruto nodded in confirmation before Anko burst out laughing before saying, "That is hilarious, the most powerful being on this plane of existence is a girl. Take that, you sexist bastards." Naruto laughed as well and said, "It is hilarious, I laughed too when I found out." Anko calmed down before saying, "Okay, well, now that we are done, I expect you at the mission hall tomorrow so we can begin taking missions." Naruto saluted and said, "All right, see you then." Anko nodded and said, "Dismissed." Naruto left in a shin and went back to his apartment to rest after the harsh and chakra-draining battle, but to avoid the mob of demon haters that were sure to be out looking for him. Anko shined out of the clearing as well, but headed to the Hokage's office to report. The Hokage had managed the situation with the incident involving the release of the Kyuubi's chakra, and now had all the Jonin were once again all standing in front of their Hokage when the Hokage said, "Report." The Jonin in the room listed of the either pass or failure of their genin team one by one. Team 1, fail. Team 2, fail. Team 3, fail. Team 4, fail. Team 5, fail. Team 6, fail. Team 7, pass. Team 8, pass. Team 10, pass. Team 11, pass. All the Jonin in the room stared at Anko like she was crazy. Anko blared back and said, "What?" He was able to use the summoning jutsu to summon foxes. He could use every element nature, and he had a funky dojutsu. The kid could keep up with me even when I was pushing high chunin speed and strength. All the Jonin were shocked, to say the least. The Hokage nodded and said, "All right, then you are all dismissed." All the Jonin left the room before the Hokage turned his chair to look out over the village and said to no one in particular, "I am getting too old for this sort shit." Time skip. Hour. The Hokage was finishing up his work for the day when someone burst through the door. Looking up, Sarutobi noticed the blonde-haired boy that was walking in. Sarutobi said in a kind voice, "Hello Naruto, what brings you here?" Naruto looked at the Hokage with a serious expression and said, "I came here to talk to you about my heritage since I am officially a ninja. No, the civilian council can't touch me. And don't give me that crap about you not knowing what I am talking about because, I know, you know. Besides, I already know who my parents are, and I want what they left to me after they passed." The Hokage looked at Naruto with shock before becoming serious and saying, "Naruto, I was only protecting you. Your father has many enemies and your mother had quite a few as well." Naruto nodded and said, "I understand that I have accepted it, but I don't plan on taking my full name just yet. After the Chunin exams, I want you to reveal my heritage to the village. But for right now, I want what is rightfully mine. Alright Naruto, here is the entire portfolio of legal and financial documents pertaining to you," said the Hokage as he handed Naruto a storage scroll that he had pulled out of a drawer. "Your new house uses a blood seal for the lock, so you will be able to get in because you are the heir to the house. Everything else should be in the house along with Minato's and Kushina's jutsu library." Naruto nodded and said, "Thanks Gigi, I will be moving in today if that is alright." "That is fine Naruto, go right ahead, it is your house now," said Sarutobi. "Okay then, I will see you later. Oh, and by the way, why don't you use shadow clones to do your work? I mean, you still receive the memories, so you are completely in control and you know what is going on with the village," said a curious Naruto. Sarutobi stared at Naruto with wide eyes and then reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope with the words, "For when you figure out the secret to beating paperwork," written on it with a chibi picture of Jiraiya on it. Sarutobi opened the envelope and took out a target and placed it on his desk before he proceeded to slam his head against the desk. While this was happening, Naruto was laughing at the Hokage's antics and said a quick goodbye before slipping out to move into his new house. Naruto awoke with a yawn and stretched his arms while he looked around his new room in the master bedroom for his family's house. He had to admit his parents had great taste. The house sat on a massive piece of land that would have eventually been used to expand the clan. The main and only house on the property was a massive 10-bedroom house, each with its own bathroom. The downstairs have a large kitchen with an attached dining room, living room that could hold a party of 50 people comfortably, and a study that had some of his father's unfinished projects inside. The basement was a massive jutsu library which had shelves of techniques that would make Orochimaru jealous. In the back of the library were 2 scrolls that contained his parents' personal jutsus and weapons. Behind the house were a training field and a hot spring. The property was 20 acres and was surrounded by a stone wall that was 10 feet tall. The wall had fuin carved into it that created a barrier over the whole compound that made it impossible for someone to enter unless they go through the front gate, which only Naruto could open. Getting out of bed, Naruto got ready for the day. After he had finished his morning ritual, he went down to his parents' library and picked up his mother's and father's scroll and sealed them away for later study when he was bored. He then walked outside to the training field and created 300 shadow clones. He then unsealed the Academy blood clone and began giving directions. "Okay, I want 100 of you guys to practice the kunai balancing exercise while tree walking to increase our chakra control. I want 50 of you to go to the library and begin to read any material on sub-element and fuinjutsu. I want 50 more of you to start practicing the sensor jutsu Ruka gave us. I want to be able to without hand seals. I want another 50 of you guys to work on our taijutsu katas. The last 50 of you, I want you guys so begin working on the jutsus in the library," finished a stern Naruto. Naruto receiving a chorus of "yes sir" from his clones in return to his orders. Naruto turned to look at his blood clones and said, "I want you to supervise and to replace any of the shadow clones that use all their chakra." The blood clone saluted and said, "Yes sir, Naruto-sama." Naruto nodded and turned to leave. Walking to the front gate, Naruto walked out and locked the gate behind him. Naruto then shined to the mission hall to meet Anko. Mission hall. Naruto arrived at the mission hall and walked inside. As he entered the mission hall, Naruto looked around and noticed Anko waiting for him at the mission desk. As soon as Anko saw him, she waved and said, "Hey there Gaki, ready to start taking missions?" Anko turned to the Chunin that was giving out missions and said, "Hey, mission dude, we would like a mission." The Chunin looked at Anko with a small frown and said, "Here you go," as he handed Anko a scroll. Anko looked at the scroll and frowned before looking back at the Chunin and said, "Oh hell no, we are not doing D-rank missions." The Chunin looked at her and said, "The Hokage gave me strict instructions saying that your team had to them just like any other team." Anko frowned, but this is when Naruto decided to speak up and ask the Chunin, "How many D-rank missions does a team have to do before they can accept a higher rank mission?" The Chunin looked at Naruto and said, "Well, it is usually 30 D ranks for every C rank mission for Genin teams. Why do you ask?" Naruto looked at him with an evil smirk before saying, "Oh, no reason." Naruto then made the hand seal required for the shadow clone and created 90 clones, which filled the empty lobby of the mission hall. Naruto then looked back to the slack-jawed Chunin and said, "I would like 30 D-rank missions, please." The Chunin was too shocked to argue, just handed Naruto a stack of scrolls. Naruto then turned around and started handing out the scrolls out to his clones before saying, "Alright, break up into groups of 3, and every group has to have a scroll. Once that is done, go complete the task described in the scroll and return the signed mission scroll to this Chunin at the desk." Once Naruto finished talking, the clones saluted and began to file out of the building to complete their assignments. The real Naruto then turned to a speechless Anko. Naruto spoke up saying, "Alright, why don't we go train for a few hours before we go grab lunch?" Anko nodded then walked out with Naruto, both of them heading to the Forest of Death. Time skip. Hour. Forest of Death. Naruto was currently in a clearing waiting for his sensei to attack from anywhere. He could tell she was there, but where was unknown to him. Suddenly hands shot out from under him and he got pulled underground up to his head. After struggling for a minute, he looked up to see Anko smirking at him with success. But Naruto smirked right back and said, "I would be so confident just yet, Anko-chan, especially since the boss has you right where he wants you." Anko looked around rapidly to see thousands of shuriken flying at her from all directions. Unable to dodge, Anko thought quickly and began running through hand seals at an astonishing rate before slamming her hands on the ground and saying, "Earth style, Earth encampment dome." A dome of earth surrounded Anko just before thousands of shuriken hit with a solid thud. With a poof, the thousands of shuriken disappeared to revealing 10 real shuriken while the others were shadow clones. Naruto landed in front of the dome with an evil grin before making a single hand seal. Then taking a deep breath and exhaling a fireball that would put the Uchiha clan's signature fire technique to utter shame. Anko began to sweat as the air in the dome began to heat rapidly. Anko began to freak out as her student baked her alive inside her own defensive jutsu. Naruto began to see cracks in the earth dome when he stopped his fireball. Jumping back, Naruto began to charge lightning chakra to his fist. As the earth dome collapsed and Anko stepped out, Naruto sprinted at her with his fist cocked back. Caught off guard, Anko attempted to block the punch with her arm only to receive a severe shock. Both people jumped back to get some air. Naruto and Anko stared each other down, trying to predict each other's next move. Both rushed forward and began a fierce taijutsu battle with neither party giving an inch. Breaking apart once again, Anko looked at Naruto and said, "Well, this is fun, Naruto-kun, but I have won." Naruto looked at her like she was insane and asked, "How do you figure that you won?" Anko just simply pointed up. Naruto raised an eyebrow and looked up to see what she was pointing at. As Naruto looked up, he saw a snake clone of Anko about a foot from his face, ready to give Naruto a chakra-infused dropkick to the head. Before Naruto could do anything to stop the blow to hit home, rendering him unconscious. Time skip. 10 minutes. Naruto woke up with a groan and held his head due to the throbbing pain radiating from there. Getting over the pain, Naruto looked around to see Anko sitting on a tree stump watching him. Once Naruto made eye contact, Anko spoke up. Impressive for most people that a tap would render them dead or unconscious for several days. Naruto replied with a huff, "I heal fast due to Kyuubi and the fact that Uzumakis have advanced healing rates to begin with." Nodding her head, Anko said, "Well, now that you're awake, I want to talk to you about our spar. You did very well with the restrictions to weapons, taijutsu and any ninjutsu that could be used in collaboration with the 2 previous mentioned ninja arts. But you lack experience in fighting hand to hand. You also allowed your senses to hone in on me solely. This is bad because another ninja could easily take you out from another angle as you are fighting another ninja. But if I had to rank your skill level, one would say you are low to mid chunin, but that is due mostly to your lack of combat experience. With that being said, I think we can call it a day for training. But I want you at the mission hall tomorrow so we can get a C-rank mission. No better practice than in the field. Naruto nodded his head and said, "Alright, that sounds good. See you later, Anko-chan." Naruto disappeared in a shin, leaving Anko alone to contemplate the insanity that was Naruto. Naruto's house. Naruto appeared right in front of the gate that leads onto the Namikaze Uzumaki land. Unsealing the front gate, Naruto walked to his house and went up to the master bedroom that once belonged to his parents. Lying down on the bed, Naruto closed his eyes to take a nap before his date with Hinata tonight. Time skip. Naruto woke up from his nap with sigh. Getting up, Naruto went downstairs and out to the training field to see how his clones were progressing. Walking outside, Naruto saw his clones working hard and he walked up to the blood clone that was supervising the training. Naruto cleared his throat to get the clone's attention before commanding, "Status report." The clone saluted before saying, "We have accomplished a lot today, sir. The clones polishing your taijutsu technique have run through the katas perfectly, and the clones working on the sub-elements have managed to find information on Wu's release and have started to try and grow a tree, but progress on that seems to be slow." Nodding, Naruto said, "Thank you. Now please disperse the clones 10 at a time every 5 minutes. The clone turned around and began giving orders to the other clones to start dispersing. As this was happening, Naruto walked away to go get ready for his date. Time skip. Naruto was walking toward the Hyuga compound in a black suit that made him look really classy. Part of the time he trained with Kyuubi. Kyuubi taught him how to act in public and how to be gentleman when taking a girl out, and Naruto was really happy that she did at the moment. As Naruto rounded the corner, he saw the entrance to the compound in front of him with guards at the entrance. Walking up to the guards, Naruto bowed and the guard returned the gesture. Standing back up, Naruto said, "I am here to pick up Hinata Hyuga for our date." One of the guards spoke up and said, "Come with me. Hiyashi-sama would like to speak with you before you go out with his daughter." Nodding, Naruto followed the guard through the compound to a study in the main house. The guard turned around at the entrance and said, "Hiyashi-sama is expecting you." Naruto nodded and walked into the study, closing the sliding door behind him. Naruto saw Hiyashi behind a desk waiting for Naruto to sit down. Naruto sat down in front of Hiyashi and waited for him to speak. After a long period of silence, Hiyashi finally spoke. "What are your intentions with my daughter, Naruto-san?" Naruto simply smiled and said, "To take her out to have a nice dinner and to talk so I can get to know her better." Hiyashi was quiet for a moment before saying, "You may take her out, Naruto-san, but be warned, if you hurt her I will personally make it so you can't have children, am I clear?" "Crystal, Hiyashi-sama," said a serious Naruto. "You may leave and you can pick up Hinata at the front entrance," said an equally as serious Hiyashi. Naruto got up and left the room. Once out of the study, the guard to Naruto back to the front entrance where Hinata was waiting for him. As Naruto neared Hinata, he asked, "Ready to go, Hinata-chan?" The lavender-eyed girl nodded in confirmation. Naruto looked her over and thought about how beautiful she was in her dress. Naruto then took her by the hand and they began to walk to the restaurant district of Konoha. As soon as Naruto grabbed Hinata's hand, her face became a bright red and she thought, "He is holding my hand." Naruto and Hinata walked in silence due to Naruto not knowing what to say and Hinata being too shy to say anything. Naruto eventually stopped with Hinata in front of a fancy restaurant. Hinata gasped as she read the name of the restaurant and then looked at Naruto and said, "Naruto, you shouldn't have. This is the Twirling Leaf, one of the hardest restaurants to get reservations in the village." Naruto smiled at her and said, "Well, only the best for my dates." Hinata almost started crying when she heard that, but kept her composure as to avoid ruining the date. They both walked inside with Naruto leading the way. They went up to the host and Naruto said, "Table for 2 under Uzumaki." The host looked at the list and when he came to Naruto's reservation he widened his eyes considerably before snapping his head back up and saying with a smile, "Right this way, Uzumaki-sama." They followed the host to an elevator where they were then taken to the 3rd floor. The host then brought them to a private room that looked stunning. Naruto pulled Hinata's chair out for her and then sat himself down. Once he sat down, Hinata asked the question that was on her mind, "Naruto, how did you get a reservation here? My father has trouble getting reservations for the first floor and he has enormous influence because he is the head of the Hyuga clan and a member of the village council. I mean, this is the third floor, reserved for the owners and the richest patrons. How did you get a table here? Naruto looked at her with a smile and said while rubbing the back of his head, well, you see, I sort of own the place outright. To say Hinata was surprised was an understatement. The look of pure shock and surprise on Hinata's face caused Naruto to start snickering as a waiter came into the room and asked if they would like anything to drink. Naruto responded to the waiter by saying, "Water for now, please." The waiter nodded and left the room. After the waiter left the room, Hinata snapped out of her shock and decided to follow up on her previous question by asking, "Naruto, how do you own this place? As far as I know, you don't belong to a clan and aren't rich or anything." Naruto gave a sheepish smile to Hinata before saying, "Well, you see, I actually come from a very important clan that helped in the founding of Konoha. The Uzumaki clan is actually from Uzushiogakure and was allies with the Senju clan. It is because of this that my clan invested a lot of money into Konoha, and as a result I own everything they invested in because I am the last Uzumaki as far as I know." Once again, Hinata was shocked by the information that Naruto told her and said, "Wow, I mean, I never knew that there was another founding clan besides the Senju and Uchiha." Naruto nodded and said, "My clan doesn't get much public credit for our contribution. Actually, most people have forgotten about my clan. But our symbol is part of Konoha's symbol and on the back of the Chunin and Jonin vests." Hinata nodded and decided to drop the current conversation when she noticed something strange. Curious, she asked Naruto, "Hey Naruto, why are there no menus?" Naruto responded, "Because you don't need to order. The chefs here have this uncanny ability to cook exactly what every individual patron wants without ever meeting them. To be honest, it is creepy on how accurate they get it sometimes." After that, Naruto decided to ask a question of his own. "So Hinata, how is Team 8 doing with training so far?" Hinata frowned at the question before replying, "It is fine, but Kiba keeps trying to get a date with me no matter how many times I turned him down. Shino is a nice guy, but he can creepy with his quiet attitude and his bugs." Naruto laughed and said, "Well, I have a mission tomorrow, but when I get back, how about you and me have a training session? I am sure I can help you improve if you are up to it." Hinata smiled sheepishly and said, "I would love to train with you, Naruto. Just drop by training ground 8 the morning after you get back and you can hide to my team before you and I go to train alone." Naruto nodded and said, "Sounds like a plan." Following up on his response, Naruto asked another question. "Hey Hinata, I want to get to know you better, so would mind telling me about yourself? Likes, dislikes, dreams, I want to hear it all." Hinata smiled before saying, "Only if you return the favor and tell me about yourself." Naruto nodded and said, "That sounds fair, but since I asked first, you can go first." Hinata nodded in acceptance before she started to tell Naruto about her likes, dislikes and dream for the Hyuga clan. After Hinata finished telling Naruto about herself, the food came. Naruto then started to tell Hinata about himself while he ate his miso ramen. After dinner, Naruto and Hinata left the restaurant and Naruto then led Hinata to the top of the Hokage monument where they looked out over the village. When they got to the top of the monument, Hinata looked over the entire village and saw a glimmering gem. Hinata muttered a silent wow as Naruto turned to her and said, "Beautiful, isn't it? This is one of my favorite places to come and think when life becomes too confusing or when I want to clear my head from stress. I wanted to share this spot with you and I thought it would be a nice end to the date." Hinata smiled at Naruto and said in a quiet voice, "I had a wonderful time, Naruto, and I can't wait to spend more time with you when you get back from your mission." Naruto smiled and said, "I am glad you had fun, but now I should bring you home before your father gets too worried and sends out a search party. I rather not have mad Hyuga clansmen after me." Hinata giggled and nodded and the duo left to the Hyuga compound. They walked hand in hand to the Hyuga compound. As they neared the entrance to the compound, Naruto stopped, which caused Hinata to turn to face him. Naruto then pulled Hinata into a hug and said, "Bye Hinata-chan, see you in a few days." After that, Naruto pulled back and placed a gentle kiss on Hinata's lips. Hinata instantly went bright red and fainted, causing the guards nearby instantly rushes over to see if their clan heir was okay. Upon seeing the blush on Hinata's face, the lead guard looked at Naruto and said, "We will take it from here, Naruto-san." As the guard finished talking to Naruto, the other guard had picked Hinata up bridal style and had begun to walk into the compound. Naruto had a red tint to his face at the embarrassing moment that just happened. Naruto had not expected for Hinata to faint. It didn't register that someone said something to him until the guards had walked through the gate. Naruto muttered a quiet, "Thanks," after realizing what the guard had said. After dropping Hinata off at her family's compound, Naruto then shined to his house, so he could rest for the mission tomorrow. Naruto's house. Naruto woke up and stretched to work the last traces of sleep out of his system. Going through his normal morning routine, Naruto got ready for the day. After he finished his morning routine, Naruto began to pack supplies into a backpack. Sealing extra weapons and supplies into storage seals stitched into the fabric on the inside of the pockets. After Naruto packed enough supplies for 3 weeks of survival, Naruto shouldered the pack and shined to the gate of the compound. Going through the gate, Naruto made sure to lock the gate behind him to stop anyone from getting onto his property. Turning away from the gate, Naruto started running to the mission hall to meet Anko. Mission hall. Naruto arrived at the mission hall and walked inside. Naruto looked around and saw no sign of his sensei, so he decided to get a C-ranked mission for the team while he waited for Anko to arrive. Walking up to the Chunin at the desk, Naruto smiled and said, "Hey, I would like to get a C-ranked mission, please." The mission Chunin nodded and said, "All right, and what genin team are you on?" "Just need to make sure your team cleared the D-ranked mission requirement." Naruto smirked before saying, "I am on Team 11 and we finished 30 D-ranked missions yesterday, so I believe we can get a C rank." The Chunin looked at Naruto with amusement and said, 30 how well, let's just check to make sure." The Chunin took out Team 11's file and looked at the mission log. After a minute, the Chunin looked at Naruto, then the file, then back to Naruto before saying, 30, but that blows the old record for most number of D-ranked missions in one day out of the water. I mean, the old record was 6 and that record was set by the 3rd Hokage's genin team. Naruto smiled at the Chunin and said, "Well, I doubt many genin know the shadow clone technique." The Chunin nodded dumbly at the blonde and said, "Well, there is a note in the file here that says you will be receiving your first C rank from the 3rd Hokage personally, so you can head up there and wait for your sensei before you get your mission." Nodding, Naruto simply shined in front of the Hokage's office and walked inside. Naruto gave a wave to the Hokage as he walked in and said, "Hey Gigi, why did you want to see me?" The Hokage sighed before saying, "Hello Naruto, it is good to see you. The reason I called you in is to talk about the C-rank mission, but since you are here early, I have something else I need to tell you." Naruto gave the old Hokage a questioning look before the Hokage began to speak again. "You see Naruto, since you have such a powerful and important bloodline, you are by Konoha law to be put under the Clan Restoration Act so you can rebuild your clan." Naruto gave the Hokage a blank, emotionless stare before saying in a monotone voice, "During my training under Kyuubi, she made me learn about Konoha's laws, both shinobi and civilian, so I would know my rights and could defend myself against the civilian council. One of the laws I came across was the CRA, and I was afraid this may happen, but it is law, I won't dispute it or the fact that I qualify for it, since I do. But I have a few stipulations since the certain terms of the CRA are dictated by the current Hokage. 1. I don't want to be forced into a marriage. I would rather marry out of love. 2. My future wives can choose whether to have kids or not. It is their choice and no one else's. 3. The council can't demand me to have children and can't dictate how many children I have or I will leave the village." The Hokage nodded and said, "That will be fine. I would hate to force you into a relationship that you were unhappy with. But according to the CRA, you must marry at least 3 women before you turn 18, which gives you 6 years to get married. I will eventually have to tell the council about your dojutsu, but I don't plan on announcing your status in the CRA to the council until after I announce your heritage at the end of the Chunin exams, because at that point I hope that the fact that you have a dojutsu will be out of the bag." As the Hokage finished, the door to the office opened, revealing a cheerful Anko. The Hokage looked at her and said, "All right, on time Anko, nice to see you, and I called you and Naruto here to give you your first mission outside the village. For that mission you will be investigating reports of a bandit camp in a town nearby and eliminating it before it can become a nuisance." Naruto and Anko nodded and the Hokage handed Anko the mission scroll. Anko looked over the mission details before bowing to the Hokage and turning to leave. Naruto waved bye to the Hokage and followed Anko out the door. Once outside the room, Anko turned to face Naruto and said, Alright, I want you to go pack for 2-week mission and meet me at the West Gate in a half hour. Naruto nodded before saying, I am actually already packed, so I will see you at the gate in a half hour, but right now I am going to go kill some time. Alright then, see you at the gate and don't be late, got it? I would hate for you to become like Kakashi. Naruto laughed before saying, don't worry about me, I am just going to go read in the park near the gate, so I won't be that far. Anko nodded before making a hand seal and disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Naruto walked out of the Hokage mansion and headed towards the West Gate, all the while reading his mother's jutsu scroll. He was currently reading about a jutsu that was an extremely long-range fire-style technique. It basically shot extremely condensed fireballs over a large distance to harass enemy ninja and cause some damage before the main confrontation. Naruto was trying to memorize the hand seals required so he could practice the technique later when he had time. Naruto enjoyed learning a jutsu himself every once in a while. He especially loved learning his parents' techniques, and from the list in each scroll Naruto could tell they were formidable ninja. Reaching the West Gate, Naruto sat down on a bench right inside the entrance to the village and waited for Anko to arrive. Anko arrived 10 minutes later and Naruto got up and joined Anko at the gate. They then ran out of the village. They jumped into the forest and booked it to the town with a bandit problem. Time skip. Hour. Naruto and Anko had made great time in getting to the town in which they were commissioned. Landing in front of the entrance, Anko turned to Naruto and said, Alright, I want you to go book us 2 rooms at the local inn and then to try to collect information about the bandit group in the area from the townspeople. I will be meeting with the mayor of the town to get information and to hammer out the details of payment and the finer details of the mission. In an hour I want to meet back up and we will scout the area around the town to see where the bandit base is located. Naruto nodded with a serious face and said, Alright, I will see you in an hour. Naruto walked down the street while Anko disappeared to complete her task. It didn't take Naruto long to find the inn in the small town and to book the 2 rooms for Anko and himself. Naruto then explored the rest of the town while trying to overhear the townspeople as they talk and gossip. Naruto was disappointed in the amount of information that he was able to collect for the people that lived in the town, but he was able to get a general location of the bandit camp, so that would make searching less of a hassle. Naruto walked to the meeting point to go search the area in which the bandit camp was supposed to be with Anko. Naruto arrived at the meeting point and didn't see Anko. Naruto looked around and waited for Anko to finish her task. Naruto waited a few minutes before he saw her coming up the road to meet him. Anko walked up to Naruto and said, Hey Gaki, so what information did you find out? Naruto smiled and said, I actually found out the general location of the bandit camp, so I say we go find the camp and observe them for a while. Anko nodded and said, I agree with your plan, so let's go check out what we have to deal with and we will make a plan from there. Naruto nodded and said, Alright then, let's go, I will lead the way. Naruto ran out of the town with Anko following close behind. Running through the forest, Naruto and Anko searched the area around the village, and after about 2 hours of searching they found the bandit camp. Naruto and Anko sat at the edge of the clearing the bandit camp was in and watched the bandits from the safety of the trees. Naruto and Anko sat in silence watching the targets move, taking note of patrol patterns and any people in the camp that may be a threat. They also took note of the largest tent in the center of camp. They observed for a few hours before Anko motioned to Naruto to fall back. Naruto and Anko moved away from their perch watching the camp. Once they were away from the bandit camp, Anko spoke. Alright, this looks like a very low quality operation. The highest chakra level one sensed was around High Genin, but there may be a ninja among their ranks that can suppress their chakra. So I say that we head back to the inn and make a plan of attack. Naruto nodded and said, Alright, let's get going then. Time skip. Several hours later. Naruto and Anko were on either side of the bandit camp wearing radios so they can communicate. Anko's voice came on over the radio and said, Commence with Phase 1 of Operation Hellfire. Naruto responded, Roger. Naruto made a cross-hand seal and created 100 clones that spread out around the perimeter of the camp. Then simultaneously all the clones went through the hand seals and whispered their various techniques. The bandit camp was bombarded with dragon missiles, fireballs, mini typhoons and giant chunks of earth falling from the sky. Once the techniques stopped raining down upon the camp, the bandits were in a frenzy, moving in every direction trying to figure out what happened. Naruto and Anko moved forward and started to take out the remaining bandits that were left after the initial bombardment. With Anko was slashing bandits with her kunai in the frenzy of the initial attack and was making her way to the center of the camp towards the leader's tent. But before she made it there, a person stepped in front of her and pulled a blade from his back. Anko made a subconscious slash at the man in front of her and was surprised when the man in front of her blocked the strike. Anko suddenly became alert and focused on the bandit's chakra level. She was surprised to feel it rising from that of a high genin to that of a jonin level ninja. Anko fell into her snake-style stance and prepared for a fight as the man in front of her suddenly rushed forward in a burst of speed. Bring down his sword at Anko as he ran. Anko met his sword with a kunai, deflecting the path of the sword so it wouldn't hit her. The blades met in a clash of sparks and the two ninja glared at each other, each trying to intimidate the other. Meanwhile, with Naruto, the blonde boy had his clones converged on the camp right after his techniques ended. It was slaughterhouse and the blonde boy could only thank Kyuubi for preparing him for his first kills with the memories of thousands of deaths that Kyuubi had caused or seen, so he wouldn't freeze when he did it. Naruto and his clones were making sure none of the bandits escaped the camp and wiping out the bandits in the process. Naruto himself ran towards the center to confront the leader of the bandits. Naruto made it to the center of the camp and burst inside the tent to confront the leader of the bandits. Once inside, Naruto was surprised to see a tall man with huge muscles sitting in a chair facing the door. The man was calm and confident from what Naruto could tell from his posture. Standing up, the man spoke with a deep voice to Naruto, "So they sent a genin to take me out. Well, I guess this will be easy." At the end of the sentence, the man rushed forward and punched Naruto directly in the gut with a chakra-laced punch. Naruto went flying back and hit a tree at the edge of the clearing in which the bandit camp was in. Naruto gathered his wits before thinking, "Damn it, this guy is strong. I guess I will have to take this seriously." Naruto's eyes changed color from the brilliant blue to a pale purple and he got up to face his opponent. The man had left his tent and he was walking toward Naruto, seeing no need to rush and killing the brat. The man raised an eyebrow when he saw the boy getting up and he said, "I am impressed. That kind of punch would knock most genin out." Naruto looked the man in the eyes with his dujutsu and said, "Well, I guess I am not a normal genin now, am I?" The man replied smugly, "Well, I doubt you are strong enough to beat me even if you are a strong genin." Naruto smirked and said, "It is only a title. True power is earned through hard work." Naruto disappeared from view with a burst of speed and appeared behind the man. Naruto gave a strong kick to the man's back and sent him flying. The man did a flip in the air and landed on his feet. The man then took out brass knuckles and disappeared from view too. Moments later, the two opponents clashed and engaged in a furious taijutsu battle, with both of them receiving cuts and bruises. They broke apart and jumped back to gain some distance from each other. Both were panting from exertion, but Naruto stood up straight and created 6 clones and surrounded the leader with them. The man was starting to get mad. How a genin could compete with him was unthinkable. The man looked around at his current situation, he ready for a multi-front attack. Naruto then called out a jutsu, gravity style, almighty push. The leader of the bandit felt himself get pushed by an unknown force towards a waiting clone that had his fist cocked. The clone hit the man with a chakra-enhanced punch, sending him to another clone that repeated the process until the leader was sent back to the real Naruto. With an uppercut, Naruto sent his enemy high into the air. He then appeared above the bandit leader and did a drop kick to the man's back and said in a serious voice, "Uzumaki Barrage." The kick sent his enemy hurtling towards earth at an extremely high speed. With a sickening crack, the man's head hit the earth below and the body crumpled as it followed. Naruto landed beside the leader and sighed. He had just taken a jonin in a fight and survived. Naruto looked around and saw Anko finish off a man that she was fighting with a kunai across the neck. Naruto walked towards Anko across a field of dead bodies. Coming closer, Naruto called out, "Hey sensei, I think we can call this mission a success." Anko nodded her head and said, "We aren't done yet. We still have to loot the place and burn all the bodies and whatever we don't want before we can call it a night." "Alright, then I will make some clones and we can get this done," said a serious Naruto. Anko nodded again and said, "Good idea. Why don't you loot and collect anything we can sell or use, and I will start to gather the bodies so we can burn them." You can help me when you are done. Naruto nodded and created 2 clones and went to work collecting the money and weapons off the bandits. Naruto and his clones collected all the bandits' weapons and sealed them into a scroll. Once Naruto was done, he created several more clones and they went to work collecting the bodies littering the camp and putting them in a pile. Once they were done, Anko did a quick fire jutsu and incinerated the pile. As the flames died down, Anko turned to Naruto and said, "Alright, let's head back to the inn and get some rest. We will leave for Konoha at noon tomorrow." Naruto nodded and said, "Alright, let's get going. I can't wait to get so shut-eye." Anko and Naruto took to the trees heading back to the town so they could get some sleep. Time skip. Noon next day. Anko and Naruto left the town and started back to the village to report their success. A few hours later, they arrived at the gates of the village and passed the gate guards showing their ninja licenses as they went by. Once inside the gate, Anko turned to Naruto and said, "Alright, you can go. I can give the report by myself." Naruto nodded and said, "Alright, well, here is our half of the loot we got from the bandits." Anko thanked Naruto and walked off to report the Hokage. Naruto headed to his house to get some rest and to read up on his parents' jutsus. Thank you for watching.